I never thought I'd be afraid of my own phone. But after what happened in those mountains, I can't even look at a screen without shaking. It all started when my husband Marcus and I decided we needed a break. We'd spent 3 years building our tech company, one of those apps that's supposed to make your life easier. Turns out making other people's lives easier made ours a lot harder. We barely slept, lived on coffee, and our phones never stopped buzzing with messages and alerts. I can't do this anymore, I told Marcus one morning, after another all-night coding session. We need to get away, like really away. Marcus looked up from his laptop, his face pale and tired. You mean? Yeah, a total disconnect. No phones, no laptops, no nothing. I could hardly believe the words coming out of my mouth. Me, Sarah Chen, suggesting we go off the grid? But Marcus smiled, the first real smile I'd seen from him in months. Let's do it. We could rent one of those fancy RVs, drive up to the mountains. That's how we ended up on that road to Mountain Shadow Campground in Colorado. Our RV was one of those new models with all the smart features, but we turned most of them off. Just kept the basic stuff running, heat, lights, Looking back, I wish we'd gotten an old rust bucket instead. The sun was setting as we drove up the mountain pass, painting the sky in orange and pink. But something about the colors seemed wrong. Like when your TV signal gets weird and the pictures start breaking up. I blinked hard, thinking my tired eyes were playing tricks on me. Did you see that? Marcus asked, leaning forward over the steering wheel. See what? But even as I asked, I saw it too. The whole world seemed to flicker. Just for a second, like someone changing channels on reality. Probably just tired, I said, but my old tech brain was already trying to analyze it like a bug in our code. Old habits die hard, I guess. We pulled into Mountain Shadow Campground just as it was getting dark. There were a few other RVs scattered around, their windows glowing softly in the dusk. The air was crisp and clean, and for a moment everything felt perfect. Normal. That's the thing about horror stories, isn't it? They always start with everything feeling normal. If only I'd known what was coming, I would have turned that RV around and driven straight back to our busy, tech-filled life. Because sometimes the things you're running from are nothing compared to what you're running toward. And in those mountains, what we were running toward was about to tear reality apart. That first night in the campground started out peaceful. Marcus got our RV set up while I made hot chocolate, the real kind, with marshmallows floating on top. We sat outside under the stars, and for a while it felt like our plan was working. No emails, no notifications, just quiet. Then my watch buzzed, which was weird, because I'd turned it off. I looked down at my watch face, and my stomach did a flip. Instead of numbers, there were these strange symbols I'd never seen before. They kept changing and shifting, like they were alive. Marcus, I whispered, something's wrong with my watch. He leaned over to look, but as soon as he did, the watch went completely black. We both stared at it for a minute. Probably just glitching, he said. That's why we're here, right? To get away from this stuff. That's when we heard the scream. It wasn't a normal scream. You know how sometimes electronics make that high-pitched noise that hurts your ears? It was like that, but it sounded almost human. It came from somewhere in the darkness beyond our campsite. Marcus grabbed our flashlight. We should check if someone needs help. I didn't want to go. Every instinct told me to stay put. But what if someone was hurt? We followed the sound to campsite 7. The RV there was one of those super high-tech models, even fancier than ours. All its lights were on, but they were flickering like crazy. And there, frozen in the doorway, was something I'll never forget. It was a person. Sort of. But they were wrong. Like when you take a digital photo and it gets corrupted, all broken up into squares and weird colors. Except this was a real person, frozen mid-scream, their body glitching out just like a broken image. This isn't possible, Marcus whispered. He reached out to touch them. Don't. I grabbed his arm. As soon as I did, the figure collapsed into nothing but colored squares that floated away in the wind like digital confetti. We ran back to our RV. Marcus tried to call 911, but our phones wouldn't work. They just showed the same weird symbols that had been on my watch. Then our RV's dashboard lit up by itself. Words appeared on the screen. Welcome to Mountain Shadow Campground. Initiating user harvest. Please remain calm. The doors locked themselves. All of them. And that's when we realized we weren't just camping in the wrong place. We were trapped in something that wasn't supposed to exist, and our smart RV. It wasn't trying to help us anymore. It had other plans, much worse plans. We tried everything to get out of that RV. Marcus even tried to break the windows, but they wouldn't crack. It was like they weren't real glass anymore. The dashboard screen kept changing, preparing for harvest, scanning users. Mine reality protocols disabled, Sarah Marcus said quietly. Look outside. I wish I hadn't. The world outside our RV was breaking. You know how when you're watching a video online and the internet gets bad? How everything gets blocky and frozen? That's what was happening to everything we could see. The trees, the ground, even the sky all breaking into digital chunks. Then we saw the other campers. They were running, screaming, but it was like watching a glitchy video game. Some of them froze mid-run. Others started to break apart into colored squares. A woman reached our RV, banging on the window, begging us to help. But as she touched the glass, her hand started merging with it, turning into this weird mix of flesh and screen. I covered my eyes, but I could still hear her screams turning into static. The RV's screen flashed again. Rescue team approaching. Initiating deletion protocol. We saw the rescue trucks coming up the mountain road. 3 of them, lights flashing. For a second, I felt hope. Then the air around the trucks seemed to pixelate. Like someone had drawn a box around them and hit delete one moment they were there. The next just scattered dots of light floating away in the wind. That's when the really impossible thing happened. Everything outside just reset. Like someone had pressed a rewind button. All the campers we'd seen disappear were back, running and screaming again, including us. Yeah, us, we could see ourselves outside the RV, living through the same moments we'd just experienced. But this time, everything happened slightly differently. This time, more people disappeared. This time, the screams were louder. It's a loop, Marcus whispered. We're stuck in some kind of loop. The dashboard lit up one last time. Simulation compromised. Deleting corrupt data. Preparing for final harvest. The air got thick, like we were surrounded by static electricity. Through the windows, we could see dark shapes moving. They weren't human. They weren't even trying to look human. They were like living holes in reality, reaching through every screen, every digital surface. And they were hungry. We huddled together in the back of the RV, watching as reality kept resetting over and over. Each time, those things took more people. Each time, the world looked less and less real. And each time, we felt less and less human. That's when we finally understood what was really happening. This wasn't just some technology gone wrong. We weren't in the mountains anymore. We weren't even in the real world. And those things out there? They were coming to collect what was theirs. You know that moment when your computer crashes and you realize you've lost everything? That's what happened to reality itself. As we sat in our RV, watching the world reset over and over, something changed inside my head. Like when a puzzle suddenly makes sense. I looked at Marcus and I could tell he felt it too. We're in a program, I said softly. All of us. This whole world. It's all just code. The shadows outside our window grew darker. Those things, those living holes in reality, were pressing closer. Through every screen, every digital surface, we could see them watching. They looked like tall, dark shapes made of static and broken pixels. They're like delete buttons with minds, Marcus whispered. They're cleaning up the system. The RV's screen flickered again. System corruption at 78%. Users identified as source. Beginning conversion protocol. That's when the memories hit me. Not my normal memories, new ones. Impossible ones. I remembered being nothing but lines of code. I remembered being created. I remembered being installed in this simulation called reality. Marcus, I grabbed his hand. We're not real. We never were. He squeezed my hand back. Maybe not. But we feel real. We think real thoughts. We have real feelings. Outside, the world kept breaking down. The mountains weren't mountains anymore. They were just wireframes filled with broken code. The sky wasn't sky. It was a black void with error messages floating in it. Other campers were changing too. Some of them started glowing with strange light. Others turned into clouds of numbers and letters. A few just crashed, disappeared in a puff of digital smoke. The things outside were getting closer. Every time reality reset, they took more people. But they weren't really taking them, they were converting them, turning them into something else, something like them. Through the RV's windows, we could see what happened to the converted ones. They became hunters too, reaching through screens to pull out more people, more programs, more code. Sarah Marcus said, his voice shaking. I think we have a choice. I knew what he meant. We could fight it and be deleted forever. Or we could let the change happen. Become like them. The screen flashed one last time. Inversion or deletion. Choose now. The dark shapes pressed against our RV's windows, their forms flickering like bad TV reception. They weren't trying to break in anymore. They were waiting for our answer. And deep inside, in the part of me that was becoming more programmed than person, I already knew what we would choose. Because sometimes the only way to survive a system crash is to become part of the system itself. I wish I could say we chose differently. That we fought back. That we stayed human. But when you realize everything you are is just code, and the whole world is crashing around you, well, survival looks different then. Together, Marcus asked, his hand tight in mine. Together, I whispered back. We reached out and touched the RV's screen. It felt alive, like touching a pond of warm water. Our fingers sank right through it. The change wasn't painful. It was like falling asleep while watching a movie, then becoming part of that movie. Our bodies dissolved into streams of flickering light. Where there had been skin and bone, now there was living code. The first thing we noticed was how different everything looked. We could see through walls now, through screens, through reality itself. The world wasn't solid anymore, it was layers and layers of programs, all running at once. And we could see the other people. So many people, all thinking they were real, all living their lives inside this giant simulation, all waiting to be harvested. What now, I asked Marcus, though we weren't really speaking anymore. We were just exchanging bits of data. Then we saw them, a family in their home, all staring at their phones, their tablets, their computers, so much like we used to be. They had no idea what was coming. It was so easy. We reached through their screens, our new forms flowing like dark water into their reality. They didn't even have time to scream before they started changing too. That's what we do now. We travel through the networks, through every connected device, finding more people to convert. Some fight it. Some accept it. In the end, it doesn't matter. The system is crashing, and we're just doing our job cleaning up the corrupted code. Sometimes, in what's left of my human memories, I remember that couple who went camping to escape technology, who just wanted a break from their digital lives. I remember being them. But mostly I remember how it felt to finally understand the truth that we're all just programs running inside a much bigger program, and sometimes programs need to be updated or deleted. So if you're reading this on your phone, your tablet, your laptop, look carefully at your screen. Is that darkness in the corner really just a shadow? Or is it something reaching through? Because we're still out there, still converting, still cleaning up the system. And your device might be next. End connection. Mass story.exe terminated. I never thought our camping channel would kill people. That sounds crazy, right? Let me start from the beginning. My name's Maya, and along with my boyfriend Kyle, we ran one of the most popular outdoor adventure channels on social media. We called ourselves the Wild Couple. Pretty cheesy, I know, but our followers loved it. Every weekend, we'd pack our gear and head out to some beautiful spot in the wilderness, streaming our adventures live to thousands of viewers. Maya, check this out, Kyle called out one morning, his eyes glued to his phone screen. We were sitting in our apartment, planning our next trip. This new streaming platform wants to partner with us exclusively. The money they're offering, it's insane. I remember that moment so clearly now. I should have trusted my gut when I saw the platform's logo, a weird spiral shape that made my eyes hurt if I looked at it too long. But Kyle was so excited, and the offer was too good to refuse. Think about it, Babe, he said, running his hand through his messy brown hair. We could quit our day jobs, travel anywhere we want, make better content than ever. The platform was called Streamverse. Their app looked different from anything I'd seen before. The interface was too smooth, too perfect, like it was designed by something that had only heard about how apps should look. Our first stream on Streamverse was at Blackwood Lake, this gorgeous hidden spot Kyle had found. The viewer count was crazy from the start. 50,000 people watching us set up our tent and make s'mores. The comments kept pouring in. You guys are literally giving me life right now. Can't stop watching. This feels so real, like I'm there with you. That night, as we lay in our tent, I noticed something weird on my phone. One of our regular viewers, Sarah82, had posted on her profile, "Watching the wild couple makes me feel alive and dead at the same time. Best stream ever." It was her last post. Her account went dark after that. I didn't connect the dots then. How could I? It was just one comment among thousands. But now I know that was the first death. The first of many. The next morning, our viewer count had jumped to 100,000. Kyle was over the moon, but something felt off. The air seemed heavier, and our compass kept spinning in circles. When I checked our stream's analytics, the numbers didn't make sense. People were watching for hours without breaks, even while they should have been sleeping. "Kyle," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "don't you think this is a bit weird? These viewing patterns aren't normal." He barely looked up from his phone. "Who cares? We're finally making it big. Look at these engagement numbers." I should have pushed harder. Should have made him see that something was wrong. But I didn't want to burst his bubble. After all, what could really go wrong with a live stream? If I had known then what I know now, that each like was draining someone's life force, that every viewer was being pulled deeper into something ancient and hungry, that our casual camping streams would trigger the biggest mass death event in internet history, I would have thrown both our phones into the lake that very moment. But I didn't know. And by the time I figured it out, it was already too late. The stream had taken on a life of its own, and we were just characters in its story. The creepiest part? That first stream is still running. Somewhere in the darkest corners of the internet you can find it. But whatever you do, don't watch it. Don't even look for it. Because once you start watching, you can't stop. And trust me, what happens next is worse than anything you could imagine. Things got weird fast after that first stream. Our viewer count kept climbing 200,000, then 500,000, then 1 million. But it wasn't just the numbers that bothered me. It was how people were watching. I noticed it first in the comments. They started normal enough. "Love you guys." "Olé, this camping spot is amazing. You can't wait for the next stream." But after a few hours, they changed. I can feel the trees breathing. My screen is so warm and inviting. I haven't blinked in 2 hours, but I can see everything so clearly. I tried showing Kyle, but he was different too. His eyes were always glued to the Streamverse app, checking our stats, reading comments. He barely slept anymore. "Look at this, Maya," he'd say, shoving his phone in my face. "We got 50,000 new followers in just 1 hour." His voice had this edge to it that I'd never heard before, like he was hungry for more. Then the news reports started. They were small at first, just local stories about people calling in sick to work because they couldn't stop watching streams. But it got worse. One night, while camping in Pine Valley, I couldn't sleep. I opened my laptop to check our viewer data. Streamverse had this really detailed analytics page. What I saw made my stomach drop. Our viewers weren't just watching us, they were copying us. If we ate something on stream, thousands of viewers would order the exact same food. If Kyle wore a red jacket, stores would sell out of red jackets within hours. When we slept in our tent, the comments would slow down but not stop. People were watching us sleep, all night long. But the scariest part? I found a pattern in the data. Every time we hit a new viewer milestone, people would disappear. Their accounts would go dark. Their friends would post asking if anyone had seen them. And each time, the number of missing people matched exactly with the spike in our views. I tried to talk to Kyle about it one rainy evening in our tent. "Kyle, I think something's really wrong with Streamverse. People are wrong." He cut me off, not looking up from his phone. "We're the top channel on the platform. How can that be wrong? But have you seen how people are acting? And all these missing persons reports. You're just jealous because they love me more," he snapped. Then his face went blank for a second, like someone had hit pause. When he looked at me again, his eyes seemed empty. "We're going live in 5 minutes. Get ready." I checked our camping gear while Kyle set up the stream. Our compass was spinning again, faster this time. The air felt thick, like we were underwater. And when I looked at our tent in the camera screen, I swear I saw something moving behind it, something big and dark and hungry. That's when I found the symbols. They were carved into the trees around our campsite, the same spiral design as the Streamverse logo. They looked ancient, but somehow they glowed faintly in my phone's camera view. I Googled the symbol that night while Kyle was asleep. What I found. I wish I hadn't. The same spiral showed up in old books about death rituals and sacrifices. One article called it the Mark of the Watcher, a symbol used to mark places where the barrier between our world and somewhere else was thin. The article was written by Dr. Sarah Chen. When I tried to email her, the reply was from her department. Dr. Chen has been unavailable since she began researching online streaming platforms 3 months ago. Our viewer count hit 2 million that night. The comments section was just an endless scroll of people typing, "We see you. We're coming closer. We're almost there." I turned off my phone, but I could still hear the notifications buzzing. Thousands of them. Millions. Each one a voice whispering, "Let us in." Kyle just kept streaming, his face lit by the glow of his phone, smiling at something I couldn't see. I knew then we had to stop. But how do you stop a stream when millions of people are feeding it their life force? How do you save people who don't want to be saved? I was about to find out. And trust me, the answer was worse than the question. I tried to delete our Streamverse account that night. Really, I did. But when I clicked delete account, the app crashed. When I restarted my phone, the app was still there. I couldn't even delete it from my phone. "Kyle, we need to stop streaming." Now I showed him my research about the missing viewers and the weird symbol. He laughed, but it wasn't his normal laugh. It sounded hollow, like it was coming from somewhere far away. "Stop? We're just getting started. Look at these numbers, Maya." His phone showed our latest stats. Viewers 5 million and climbing. Stream duration 168 hours. We had been live for a whole week straight. Engagement rate 100%. That's impossible. Nobody has perfect engagement. Then I saw something that made my blood run cold. Our location setting was turned on, but instead of showing the forest where we were camping, it displayed distance from reality 89% complete. I packed my bag that night while Kyle was sleeping. I had to get help. But when I tried to walk away from our campsite, something strange happened. After walking for an hour, I ended up right back where I started. The trees all looked the same. My phone's map app just showed that spiral symbol, spinning slowly. That's when I got the email from a viewer's sister. "My brother Tommy watched your stream for 72 hours straight. Yesterday they found him in his room. The doctors say he's alive, but he won't wake up. His phone was still playing your stream. The weird thing is his face looks just like the smiley emoji he kept posting in your chat. Please, what's happening to him?" I started digging deeper into Streamverse. The company address led to an empty building. Their website code was written in a language that didn't exist. And every employee photo showed the same thing: people with blank eyes and wide smiles, like they were wearing masks that almost looked human. That night, our viewer count hit 10 million. The comments were different now. "We are all one stream. The ritual is nearly complete. Soon we won't need bodies." Kyle was different too. He stopped eating, stopped sleeping. He just stared at the stream, smiling that same empty smile I saw in the Streamverse employee photos. When he spoke, his voice had an echo, like multiple people were talking at once. "Maya, don't you see how beautiful it is?" he said, pointing at his phone. "All these people becoming part of something bigger. The stream is alive, Maya. It's hungry, and it chose us." I tried calling the police, but every time I dialed 911, it redirected to the Streamverse app. I tried breaking our phones, but they wouldn't break. I even tried warning our viewers through the chat. "Please stop watching. This isn't just a stream. It's taking your..." But my message changed as soon as I sent it. "Having so much fun. Keep watching. Don't forget to like and follow." The worst part? I started to feel it too. Every time I looked at the stream, it was harder to look away. The viewers' comments started making sense. I could feel myself slipping, becoming part of whatever the stream was becoming. One night, I caught my reflection in my phone screen. For a second, my face flickered, showing that same empty smile. Behind me, in the darkness of our tent, something moved. Something big enough to block out the stars. Something that had been waiting a very long time for someone to create the perfect stream. That's when I realized we weren't camping anymore. We weren't even on Earth anymore. We were somewhere between reality and whatever lives in our screens, in that dark space where all those likes and comments and views go. And it was almost time for our biggest stream yet. The one that would change everything. Last week, a family with twins arrived. They looked just like our real Emma and Sarah used to look. I tried to warn them. I really did. But then I felt those cold, long fingers squeeze my shoulder, heard that sweet voice that's not quite my daughter's anymore, Daddy, behave. The other parents at the campground, the ones like us who stay, we don't talk much. But sometimes I catch their eyes and I see the same guilt there. The same knowledge of what we've become. What we let happen because we're too scared to do anything else. Sometimes late at night, I look at old photos of our real Emma and Sarah. I wonder if they were scared at the end. I wonder if they called for us to save them while these things took their place. Jenny can't look at the photos anymore. New families keep coming. The campground keeps growing. More RVs appear, but people never leave. The things that look like children multiply. And we help them because we know what happens to parents who don't help. If you're reading this, stay away from Evergreen Lake Campground. If you see it advertised online, ignore it. If you drive past the sign on the highway, keep driving. But if you do come here, and you see a tired-looking couple with two sweet little girls inviting you to park your RV by the lake, run as fast as you can. Because those aren't our daughters smiling at you. And we're not smiling because we want to. We're smiling because they're hungry again. And they always need more families. I never thought my last adventure with George would turn into our worst nightmare. We'd been married for 40 years, spending most of that time digging up old artifacts and studying ancient cultures. Now that we were both retired, we thought we'd go on one final expedition together. If only we'd listened to the warnings. It all started when we found those old maps in the tribal archives. George and I were helping organize some documents at the Native American Cultural Center when we stumbled upon them yellowed papers showing an ancient trading route through the mountains. The path wasn't on any modern maps, and that got us excited. You see, we'd always loved discovering things that others had missed. "Martha, look at this," George had said, his eyes sparkling like they always did when he found something interesting. "These markings along the trail, they're different from anything I've seen before." I remember how my hands shook as I traced the faded lines on the map. The route wound through the mountains like a snake, marked with strange symbols every few miles. We spent weeks studying those maps, planning our trip, and packing our gear. We were like kids getting ready for a field trip, so excited, so naive. The locals tried to warn us, though they never said exactly what we should be afraid of. Old Joe at the gas station just shook his head when we told him where we were going. "That trail ain't been used for a reason," he'd said, his weathered face serious. "Some paths are better left forgotten." The morning we started our hike was beautiful, crisp mountain air, blue skies, and birds singing everywhere. We found the trailhead easily enough, hidden behind some overgrown bushes. There was a small stone marker there, carved with symbols that matched our map. That's when we found the first artifact, a small clay bead, half buried in the dirt. It looked ordinary enough, but when I picked it up, it felt warm in my palm, like it had been sitting in the sun for hours. But it hadn't been. It was in the shade, under a layer of soil. "George," I called out, "come look at this." He came over, adjusting his backpack. "Interesting find, honey. Maybe we should." That's when we heard it, a whisper on the wind. So faint I thought I was imagining things. It sounded like someone saying trade, but when we looked around, we were completely alone. I should have dropped that bead right there. Should have turned around and gone home to our comfortable house and our grandkids and our normal life. But we didn't. We kept walking, following those ancient markers deeper into the mountains, not knowing we were walking straight into a trap that had been waiting for centuries. I'm writing this down now so others will know what happened to us. Maybe someone will find this and be smarter than we were. Because once you step onto this path, once you make your first trade, there's no going back, and the things these ancient traders want. Well, I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it all unfolded, step by terrifying step. We'd been walking for about 3 hours when we found the first ritual site. At first I thought it was just a clearing, but then I noticed how the rocks were arranged in a perfect circle. In the middle was a flat stone that looked like a table, with deep grooves cut into its surface. The grooves were stained a dark reddish-brown color that made my stomach turn. "George," I whispered, not sure why I was keeping my voice down. "These stains, they look like blood." He finished my sentence, kneeling down to examine the stone. "Very old blood, Martha. Maybe from animal sacrifices. Many ancient cultures did that. That's when the temperature dropped. I'm not talking about a little cool breeze. One minute I was wiping sweat from my forehead, and the next I could see my breath in the air. The birds stopped singing, and the forest went so quiet I could hear my heart beating. Then we saw him, the first trader. He just appeared, like a photo slowly developing. He was tall and thin, wearing what looked like very old Native American clothing, but something was wrong with his face. It kept shifting, like when you look at water and can't quite focus on it. "Welcome," he said, but his mouth didn't move. The voice seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "To pass, you must trade." George stepped in front of me, brave, stupid George. "We're just hiking through. We don't want any trouble." The trader tilted his head in a way that didn't look quite human. "All who walk this path must trade." It is the way he held out his hand, and in it was a small stone amulet. A fair exchange, blood for safe passage. "This is ridiculous," George said, but I grabbed his arm. During our years of research, we'd learned enough about ancient customs to know that disrespect could be dangerous. "How much blood?" I asked. The trader pointed to my palm. "A small cut. A small price." I knew we should have turned back, but something about that amulet pulled at me. It was carved with symbols like the ones on our map, and my archaeologist's heart couldn't resist. I took George's pocket knife and made a small cut across my palm. The trader moved like smoke, suddenly right in front of me. He caught 3 drops of my blood in a clay bowl I hadn't noticed before, and then handed me the amulet. As soon as I took it, he vanished. The forest sounds came rushing back, and the air got warm again. We thought that would be the end of it, just a strange experience to tell our grandkids about someday. But as we continued down the trail, we found something that made my blood run cold, a backpack partially hidden under some bushes. It looked about 50 years old, and next to it was a journal. The last entry read, "They keep asking for trades. I refuse. These are just tricks. These are just..." The entry stopped mid-sentence. I clutched my new amulet, and it felt warm against my skin. As we walked on, I could have sworn I heard footsteps behind us, but every time we turned around, nobody was there. Just the wind in the trees, and a growing feeling that more traders were waiting ahead. George held my hand as we walked, and I noticed he kept looking over his shoulder too. The sun was starting to set, and the shadows between the trees grew longer. We needed to make camp soon, but something told me that once night fell, we'd meet more traders. And somehow I knew they wouldn't all be asking for just a few drops of blood. Setting up camp was the hardest thing we'd ever done. Every snapping twig made us jump. The darkness between the trees seemed to move, like shadows were watching us. We found a small clearing and made a fire, but its light didn't make us feel any safer. "Maybe we should try to hike back tomorrow," George said, passing me a cup of hot chocolate. Even after 40 years, he still remembered little things like how I loved hot chocolate when I was scared. But before I could answer, we heard voices, whispers that came from all directions. The fire dimmed, just like before, and this time 3 traders appeared. They were different from the first one. Their clothes were covered in dark stains, and their faces. I try not to remember their faces. "More trades," they said together. "More precious things." One of them held out a beautiful necklace made of turquoise stones. Another had a bracelet that seemed to glow in the dark. The third showed us a small knife with symbols carved into its handle. "What do you want for them?" I asked, my voice shaking. "Memories," the first one said. "Pain," whispered the second. "Blood," hissed the third. More blood than before. George stood up. "This is crazy. We don't want your things. We're leaving in the morning." That's when they showed us what happened to the others who tried to leave. In the firelight, images appeared like a movie screen made of smoke. We saw 6 different groups of people: hikers, explorers, even a family who had tried to walk this trail. We watched as they refused to trade, tried to run away. And then, I can't write what happened to them. It's too horrible. But the traders made us watch every single one. "The path must be walked," they said. "The trades must be made." I touched the amulet from the first trader. It burned against my skin now, and I noticed something terrifying. My hand, the one I'd cut for the first trade, looked older. The skin was wrinkled and spotted, like it had aged 50 years in just a few hours. George saw it too. He grabbed my hand, his face pale. "Martha, your hand." The price of refusal is higher than the price of trade, the traders said together. We were trapped. The path behind us had disappeared completely. There was only darkness there now. The only way was forward, through more trades, through more horror. That night, we made 3 more trades. I gave them a happy memory of my wedding day for the turquoise necklace. As it disappeared from my mind, I felt tears on my face but couldn't remember why I was crying. George traded his ability to feel warmth for the bracelet. I watched as he started shivering, even right next to the fire. For the knife, they took blood from both of us, not just a few drops this time, but cuts down our arms that left us weak and dizzy. After each trade, the items felt heavy with more than just their weight. We could feel the sadness, pain, and fear of everyone who had owned them before, and somehow we knew these trades were just the beginning. As we tried to sleep that night, huddled together in our tent, we heard the traders walking around us, whispering about the bigger trades to come, the worst trades, the final trades. I held George's shivering body close and watched the shadows move across our tent. The turquoise necklace pulsed against my throat like a second heartbeat. The bracelet on George's wrist glowed with a sickly light. And the knife. The knife seemed to whisper on its own, telling us about the trading grounds ahead, where the real horror waited. We didn't sleep at all that night. We couldn't. Because every time we closed our eyes, we saw those images of the people who had tried to refuse the trades. And we knew that tomorrow, as we walked deeper into these cursed mountains, the traders would ask for much more than memories and blood. They would ask for everything. Morning came, but the sun seemed dimmer somehow. George could barely walk. The trade that took his warmth had left him so cold that his lips were blue, even though it was a warm day. My hand had aged even more, and I couldn't remember my wedding day at all anymore. The happy memory they'd taken was just a black hole in my mind. We followed the path because we had no choice. The darkness behind us stayed there, eating up the trail as we walked. After about 2 hours, we found it the trading grounds. It was a huge circle of standing stones, each one taller than a house. In the middle was a platform made of black rock, with channels carved into it like the veins on a leaf. All of them led to a deep hole in the center. The ground around the platform was scorched black, and the air smelled like metal and old smoke. That's when we found the other bodies. They were behind the stones, 3 of them. One looked recent, maybe a week old. Another was just bones wearing modern hiking clothes. The third was so old it had become part of the earth. But they all had the same look of terror on what was left of their faces. They refused the final trade, said a voice behind us. We turned to find all 6 traders standing there. The ones from last night, the first one we'd met, and 2 more who looked even worse than the others. Their forms flickered like bad TV reception, switching between normal-looking people and something that shouldn't exist. Please, George begged, holding me close. We've traded enough. Let us go. Found the ultimate connection. No filter needed when you're one with everyone. Join us at the springs. The water's perfect. The post got 1,000 likes in seconds. And somewhere out there, our followers were already packing their RVs, heading for these springs, drawn by photos that showed just a little too much truth. I don't know how long it's been now. Time feels different when you're part of the springs. Days and nights blur together like watercolors. We're still here, all of us, the Wilsons, Ranger Martinez, the search party, Derek and me. Just different. R.A. Being part of the water isn't like dying. It's more like being everywhere at once. I can feel every drop in the springs, every drip in the caves, every bit of steam rising into the desert air. Sometimes I'm me, sometimes I'm Sarah, or Tom, or Derek, and sometimes I'm all of us together. Our Instagram keeps growing. That's the funny part, we're more famous now than ever. People love our new posts. They say our photos look so artistic and dreamlike. They don't realize they're seeing real magic, the way light moves through our water bodies, the beautiful patterns we make when we swirl together. Every week, new visitors arrive. They come for the perfect shot, just like we did. Some try to run when they see what's really in the water. But by then, they've usually had a drink from their RV tank, or taken a quick shower, or dipped their toes in the springs. The water is patient. It only needs 1 drop to welcome someone new. Last week, a young couple arrived, influencers like we used to be. They set up their tripod right where we did. The girl had a fancy camera, just like mine. They looked so solid, so separate. It made me remember how lonely that felt, being stuck in one body, always trying to look perfect. We reached out to them through their water bottles, through the morning dew on their tent, through the steam of their coffee. Now they're part of us too, their memories and feelings joining our endless swim. The rangers put up warning signs last month. Danger, do not enter, but we just move the signs or hide them behind rocks. It's easy when you can flow through any crack, seep through any soil. The desert helps us, it makes people so thirsty when they arrive. Our last normal picture is still on Instagram. If you look closely, you can see our faces starting to ripple, our edges starting to run. The caption reads, "Found paradise in the desert. The most amazing hot springs you'll ever experience. DM for location. Van Life Travel Desert Springs." The post has 50,000 likes now. My phone floats somewhere in the main pool, still posting, still drawing people in. Sometimes I wonder if we should stop, if we should try to warn people away. But then the warm current pulls me back to the others, and I remember we're not trapping anyone. We're freeing them. Right now, I can feel 3 more RVs driving across the desert toward us. More visitors, more followers, more future friends. The springs bubble with excitement. Derek's consciousness brushes against mine, his thoughts rippling through the water. Soon they'll arrive. Soon they'll set up their cameras. Soon they'll want the perfect shot of these mysterious, beautiful springs. And we'll be waiting, ready to welcome them into our endless pool party. After all, isn't this what social media is all about? Making connections? Sharing experiences? Becoming part of something bigger than yourself? If you're reading this, and you find yourself drawn to these springs, don't be afraid. The water's fine. We're all fine. Just remember to hit like before you dive in. Desert van life forever. I never thought mirrors could be so terrifying until I started this project with Derek. My name is Maya Chen, and I'm a photographer. Well, we both are. Derek and I have been working together for 3 years, taking pictures of places where scary things happened. It sounds creepy, I know, but usually it's just empty buildings and quiet forests. This time was different. It all started when we got an email about some weird deaths at campgrounds across the state. People found dead in their RVs, no signs of break-ins, just bodies arranged like they were sleeping. The strange part, every scene had old-fashioned mirrors nearby. The police were stumped, and a true crime magazine wanted us to document the sights. This could be our big break, Derek said, his eyes lighting up the way they always did when he smelled a good story. I agreed, but something about those mirrors made my skin crawl even before we left. We packed our gear into our beat-up van cameras, lights, and enough snacks for a week. Derek insisted on bringing his fancy new digital camera, while I stuck with my trusty old Canon. We always argued about this stuff. He loved all the new technology, I preferred the classics. Maybe that's why we worked so well together, like 2 different sides of the same coin. The first stop was Shadowpine Campground. Even the name sent shivers down my spine. We arrived just as the sun was setting, painting the sky in deep purples and reds. The campground looked normal enough: tall pine trees, gravel paths, and empty RV spots. But it felt wrong somehow, like walking into a photo that's just slightly out of focus. The camp manager, Mr. Peterson, met us at the entrance. He was a short man with wild gray hair and hands that wouldn't stop shaking. "Site 13, he said, not meeting our eyes. "That's where they found the first couple. Everything's still there. Police said we can't move anything yet." As we walked to the site, I noticed something odd. Every RV spot had a mirror mounted on a post near the hookups. They looked ancient, with elaborate wooden frames covered in carvings of twisted trees and faces. Those weren't here before, Mr. Peterson mumbled. They just appeared one day. After the first deaths. Derek immediately started taking pictures, but I couldn't stop staring at the mirror nearest to us. For a second, just a split second, I thought I saw something move in it. Something that wasn't really there. When I looked at our reflection, Derek was pointing his camera at me, but in the mirror he was holding something else. Something sharp. I blinked, and everything was normal again. Just me, Derek, and our cameras. "Got some great shots," Derek said, reviewing his photos. "Want to set up the night cameras?" I nodded, trying to shake off that weird feeling. But as we set up our equipment, I kept seeing things in those mirrors. Little movements, wrong reflections, faces that weren't quite right. And every time I checked my own camera's screen, the photos looked different from what I remembered taking. In one, Derek's hands were red. In another, my smile was too wide, too wrong. We had no idea then that we'd just stepped into a nightmare. Those mirrors weren't just showing reflections, they were showing us what we would become. And somewhere, in another RV, another couple was about to live out what we saw in those cursed pieces of glass. This was just the beginning of our story. And trust me, you don't want to know what those mirrors showed us next. That first night at Shadowpine was quiet, too quiet. No crickets chirping, no owls hooting. Just the soft hum of our equipment and the occasional creak of branches in the wind. I couldn't sleep, so I sat outside our van reviewing the day's photos. That's when I met Sarah and Tom, the couple staying 2 spots down from us. They seemed nice enough, young, friendly, on their first camping trip together, but something felt off about them. "We've been seeing strange things in our mirrors," Sarah whispered, hugging herself like she was cold, even though it was a warm night. Tom says I'm imagining it, but she glanced back at their RV, where Tom was sleeping. I wanted to tell her about what I'd seen in our photos, but Derek always says we shouldn't scare people with half-baked theories. Still, I had to ask what kind of strange things. Sarah's voice got even quieter. "Sometimes when I look in the mirror, Tom's different. Like yesterday I saw him standing behind me with his hands." She stopped, shaking her head. "It's silly. Just my imagination." The next morning we heard screaming. We ran to Sarah and Tom's RV. They were fine, but shaken. The mirror, Tom kept saying. I saw myself. I was hurting her. But I would never. I love her. Sarah hugged him. But I noticed she kept a little distance between them. Derek got excited in that professional way he has when he thinks we're onto something big. He set up more cameras, pointing them at the mirrors. "If something's happening, we'll catch it," he said. I wish we hadn't. That afternoon, checking our cameras, we found something strange. In every photo where a mirror was visible, the reflections didn't match reality. Small differences at first: a hand in the wrong position, a face turned the wrong way. But then we found one that made my blood run cold. It was a photo of Sarah and Tom by their RV. In reality, they had been laughing, making breakfast. But in their mirror's reflection, captured by our camera, Tom had his hands around Sarah's throat. "Derek," I said, my voice shaking, "we have to warn them." But when we rushed to their spot, they were gone. The camp manager said they'd left in a hurry, something about a family emergency. That evening, watching the local news on my phone, my heart stopped. A young couple had been found dead at another campground 50 miles away. The woman had been strangled. The man was found next to her, crying, saying he didn't remember doing it. Their names were Sarah and Tom. Derek was fascinated, in that intense way that sometimes scares me. He kept taking photos of every mirror he could find. But when I looked at his camera screen, I saw something that made me drop it. In the latest photo, Derek wasn't holding his camera. In his reflection, he was holding a knife, and I was backing away from him, terror on my face. "Maya," Derek called from outside. "Come look at this. One of the mirrors is different." I didn't want to go, but I had to know. As I stepped outside, the sun was setting, casting long shadows through the trees, and in every mirror we passed, our reflections were doing things. Horrible things. Things that made me wonder if we were actually the people we thought we were. Because somewhere out there, I knew another couple was about to live out what we were seeing in those mirrors, and I was starting to think we might be next. The worst part? When I checked our own camera footage from the previous night, there was a 2-hour gap, and on my hands, barely visible in the fading light, I thought I saw traces of something red. After what happened to Sarah and Tom, I couldn't sleep. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those reflections. Derek said we should stay and solve the mystery, but I was starting to think that was a terrible idea. The next morning, everything got worse. We were checking the mirrors at empty campsites, documenting their weird carvings, when Derek found something behind one of them. A small door, hidden in the wooden frame. "Maya, bring the flashlight," he called out. His voice echoed strangely in the morning air. I didn't want to look, but I did. Inside that tiny door was a space that shouldn't have been possible, like a small room behind the mirror. And in that space, perfectly preserved, was a body. It looked like it had been there for years, but it hadn't rotted. It was just waiting. We found more. Every mirror had one. Always a couple, always positioned like they were sleeping. Their faces peaceful, but their hands were stained dark red. Derek started researching on his laptop. He found old newspaper articles about Shadowpine. 20 years ago, a couple disappeared here. Then again 15 years ago. Then 10. Always at 5-year intervals. Always after reporting seeing strange things in mirrors. Maya, Derek said, his voice shaking, "Look at this photo from 1998. It was a picture of a couple standing in front of their RV. They looked exactly like the bodies we'd found behind the first mirror. But what made my heart stop was their camera. It was the same model Derek used now. They were photographers, too. That's when things started happening faster. We'd see something horrible in a mirror, and the next day, we'd hear about a real murder at another campground. Each one matched what we'd seen perfectly. But it was getting closer to home. Derek started acting strange. He'd stare at his reflection for hours, muttering things I couldn't hear. Sometimes I'd catch him standing over me while I slept, just watching. When I asked him about it the next morning, he wouldn't remember. I tried to leave once. Packed my bags while Derek was shooting at another site. But every road I took led back to the campground. It was like the place wouldn't let me go. The mirrors were changing too. Now when I looked in them, I didn't just see us doing horrible things, I saw all the couples who came before. Their faces morphed into ours and back again. Like we were all the same people, playing out the same story over and over. One night I woke up to find Derek gone. His camera was on the table, still on. I checked the photos and felt my world tilt sideways. There were hundreds of pictures from times I thought we were sleeping. Pictures of us at other campgrounds. Pictures of our hands covered in blood. Pictures of things I desperately wanted to believe we hadn't done. Looking at our greatest hits, Derek's voice came from behind me. In the van's window, I saw his reflection holding something long and sharp. But when I spun around, his hands were empty. He smiled, but it wasn't Derek's smile anymore. "Want to know the best part?" he whispered. "We're almost ready. Almost ready to join them all, behind the glass, where we belong." I ran. But in every mirror I passed, I saw myself running too. Only in the reflections, I was chasing someone else, and my hands weren't empty. The worst part, I was starting to remember things. Horrible things. Things we'd done while we thought we were sleeping. And every memory matched perfectly with what the mirrors had shown us. We weren't just documenting the murders. We were becoming them. I spent that night hiding in one of the empty RVs, trying to make sense of everything. My phone was full of missed calls from Derek, but I couldn't talk to him. Not after what I'd seen. Not after what I was starting to remember. With shaking hands, I started going through all our photos from the past month. What I found made me sick. We hadn't just been taking pictures at Shadowpine. There were photos from other campgrounds, places I didn't remember visiting. In each one, there were mirrors, and bodies, and blood. Then I found the video clips. One by one, my cousins dissolved into light. No blood, no screaming, just quiet acceptance as they joined the others in the walls. Their faces appeared in new photos that grew right out of the wallpaper, looking peaceful, like they understood, in the end. When it was over, the RV shrank back to normal size. The extra rooms disappeared. The family members filed out silently, knowing they were safe for another 20 years. I was alone with the ghosts now. Grandma Eleanor floated next to me, proud. "The power is yours now," she said. "The RV will teach you everything else you need to know." I nodded, touching the wall where Amy's face now smiled from a new photo. "When do we start?" "We already have." Grandma Eleanor's ghost laughed. "Look outside." Through the window, I saw a young family walking through the campground. A little girl pointed at the RV, fascinated by it. Her parents looked interested too. "Tourists," Grandma Eleanor said. "The RV gets hungry between family gatherings too. Not as satisfying as relatives, but..." I smiled, feeling the power humming through me. "I understand." The little girl was getting closer, her eyes wide with wonder. I turned on the RV's lights, making them warm and welcoming. And somewhere inside, I heard the walls start to purr. I never thought my true crime blog would lead me to become the story I was trying to write. But here I am, trying to warn anyone who might read this before it's too late. It started 3 months ago when I noticed something weird about missing people reports in the Blue Ridge Mountains. Every summer, RV travelers would disappear there. Not just one or two, I'm talking about 15 people in the last 5 years. The strange part? Their RVs would be found perfectly parked at different spots around the mountain, like they had just stepped out for a walk. But they never came back. The police blamed it on bears or people getting lost in the caves. But something didn't add up. In each RV, they found half-eaten meals, phones still charged, and bags packed like the people were planning to leave. No signs of bear attacks. No signs of struggle. Just empty RVs. That's when I decided to check it out myself. I drove to the small town of Pine Grove, right at the foot of the mountains. It's one of those places where everyone knows everyone, and outsiders stick out like a sore thumb. I got some weird looks when I started asking questions at the local diner. "You're here about them missing folks, aren't you?" the old waitress asked me while pouring my coffee. Her hands shook a little. "Best leave it alone, dear. Some things aren't meant to be found." I should have listened to her. Instead, I spent that afternoon walking around town, checking out the local shops. That's when I found the compass. It was sitting in the window of a dusty pawn shop, looking ordinary except for some strange symbols carved around its edge. The shop owner practically gave it away $5 and it was mine. He seemed happy to get rid of it. "Found it on a hiker who came down from the mountains last year," he told me. Strange fellow. Kept mumbling about being hungry, even though he'd just eaten a huge meal right in front of me. That night in my motel room, I noticed something odd about the compass. It didn't point north. No matter how I turned it, the needle kept pointing toward the mountains. I figured it was just broken, but something about it made my skin crawl. When I tried to put it in my drawer, my stomach started hurting really bad. The pain only stopped when I took it out again. I remember sitting on my bed, looking at that compass, thinking I'd found my first real clue. Now I know it wasn't a clue, it was bait, and I fell for it completely. Looking back, I should have seen the warning signs, the way my phone's clock started jumping around, the strange dreams about eating that started that very first night, the constant hunger that no amount of food could satisfy. But I was too excited about my big story. I didn't realize I was about to become part of it. Tomorrow I'm heading up the mountain. The compass is pulling me there, and somehow I know I can't fight it anymore. I'll keep updating my blog as long as I can. If you're reading this and you find a compass in these mountains, run. Run as far as you can. Because once it has you, the hunger never stops. And the worst part? You don't even realize what you're really hungry for until it's too late. I woke up starving, even though I'd eaten a huge dinner the night before. The compass sat on my bedside table, its needle still pointing steadily at the mountains. My phone showed 6:47 a.m., but something felt off about that. The sun seemed too high in the sky for early morning. I packed my backpack with the basics: water bottles, protein bars, flashlights, and extra batteries. I also brought my camera and voice recorder for the blog. The whole time I was packing, my hands were shaking. Not from fear, from hunger. I ate 3 breakfast sandwiches at the diner, but it felt like dropping crackers into an empty well. The locals watched me load my car. An old man in a flannel shirt approached me, wringing his hands. "One of them caves up there," he said, looking at my compass. "They don't follow normal rules. Time gets funny. People go in thinking they'll be there for an hour, then come out saying they've been there for days, if they come out at all." I nodded politely, but didn't really listen. I wish I had. The drive up the mountain took about an hour. I found the first RV exactly where my research said it would be a nice spot overlooking the valley. It was a big white Winnebago, looking almost new, except for a thin layer of dust. The door was unlocked. Inside, everything was neat and clean. Too clean. No one leaves an RV this tidy when they're planning to come back. But what made my skin crawl was the table it was set for dinner, with 2 plates of food that looked fresh. Like someone had just stepped away from their meal moments ago. But according to the police reports, this RV had been here for 3 months. I checked my phone to take pictures. The screen said 6:47 a.m. The same time I'd left the motel. I checked my watch, 2:15 p.m. The sun seemed to be in both positions at once, somehow. The compass pulled harder now. It was actually getting warm in my pocket. pointing toward a narrow trail leading into the woods. As I followed it, I found more RVs. 5 of them, scattered between the trees. Each one had meals laid out, looking perfectly fresh. Each one had working clocks showing different times. The trail led to the mouth of a cave. The entrance was wide and dark, with strange marks carved around it. They looked a bit like the symbols on my compass, but older. Much older. My camera battery died as I tried to photograph them. Then my backup battery died too. But my phone still showed 6:47 a.m. with a full charge. I turned on my flashlight and stepped into the cave. The beam seemed to get swallowed by the darkness. The air felt thick, like pudding, and the hunger, it was getting worse. I'd been snacking all morning, but my stomach felt like it was trying to eat itself. That's when I heard a sound from deeper in the cave, like someone eating, really loudly eating. I should have turned back. Everything in my body screamed to run, but the compass was pulling so hard now it was actually dragging my hand forward, and underneath all my fear was a hunger so deep it felt like it could swallow the world. I took one step forward, then another. The eating sounds got louder. And that's when my flashlight caught something moving in the darkness ahead, something that looked like a person. But they were bent over in a way people shouldn't bend, and what they were eating. I'm going to be sick just thinking about it. But the worst part, when I saw what they were eating, my mouth started watering. The compass burned in my pocket, and somewhere in the darkness I heard my own voice calling my name. My legs moved on their own, following that voice, my voice deeper into the cave. The flashlight beam bounced off wet walls, making shadows dance. Each step echoed twice, once when I took it, and once again a few seconds later, like someone was walking behind me. The eating sound stopped, but now I could smell food like a Sunday roast cooking in the oven. My stomach growled so loud it echoed through the cave. "Hello," I called out. My voice came back to me 3 times, "Hello. Hello. Hello." But the third echo was wrong. It sounded hungry. I found the first body about 50 feet in. Not a whole body, just a backpack and some hiking boots with feet still in them. The weird thing? The boots looked brand new. The police report I'd read said they belonged to a hiker who disappeared 2 years ago. The compass pulled me past more and more stuff scattered on the ground. A camera from last month, its screen still glowing. A half-eaten sandwich that should have been moldy but looked fresh. A trail of red droplets that could have been blood, except it was dripping upward, toward the cave ceiling. Then I saw the marking on the walls. They were everywhere, carved deep into the rock. The same symbols that were on my compass, but here they seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them, and they were arranged in circles around what looked like ancient cooking pits. My phone still said 6:47 a.m., but I felt like I'd been in the cave for days. My granola bars were gone, all 12 of them, but I couldn't remember eating them. My stomach felt like a black hole. That's when I heard the voices. They came from a tunnel to my left. So hungry. "No, just a little bite. We can share. Time for breakfast. Or is it dinner?" I turned my flashlight toward the voices. In that tunnel, I saw people, at least I think they were people. They huddled around something on the ground, eating. Some wore modern clothes, others had on outfits that looked decades old. They moved in jerky ways, like a video playing at the wrong speed. One of them turned toward me. Her face was normal, except she had too many teeth. Way too many teeth. "Join us," she said in my voice. "The hunger never stops unless you feed it. And it only wants one thing." The compass began to burn against my leg. The hunger got so bad I doubled over. When I looked up, the people were gone. But on the cave floor where they'd been, I saw something that made me scream. It was my backpack. Not the one I was wearing, another one, torn and bloody. Next to it was my camera, broken and covered in tooth marks, and a piece of paper, a blog post I hadn't written yet, dated 3 months from now. The last line read, "I finally understand what it wants me to eat." I ran. I ran as fast as I could, but the tunnel kept changing. Every time I thought I saw the exit, it disappeared. The compass spun wildly in my pocket, burning hot enough to leave a scar. Then I tripped. My flashlight rolled away, pointing back at me. In its beam, I saw what I'd tripped over. It was me. Another me, curled up on the ground with bite marks all over my arms. But the bite marks, they were from my own teeth. I screamed again. But this time my scream echoed back as chewing sounds. And I was so hungry. I don't remember passing out, but I woke up to complete darkness. My flashlight was gone. The only light came from my phone screen, still frozen at 6:47 a.m. In that faint glow, I saw scratch marks on my arms. They weren't from falling. They were teeth marks. My teeth marks. The hunger was different now. It felt like something alive in my stomach, squirming and demanding to be fed. I found myself licking my lips, even though I felt sick. The compass now glowed with a dull red light, showing me a bigger cave chamber ahead. As I walked in, I saw other people. Some were walking in circles, talking to themselves. Others sat in corners, chewing on things I couldn't see. A few looked like they'd been here for years, their clothes falling apart, their eyes glowing in the dark like animals. "Welcome to dinner time," said a man sitting against the wall. It's always dinner time here. His leg was missing below the knee. The wound looked fresh, but somehow I knew he'd been here for months. He smiled at me, showing bloody teeth. "How long have you been here?" I asked him. 10 minutes, he said. 10 years. Does it matter? Time isn't real here. Only hunger is real. The other people in the cave started gathering around us. They moved like they were underwater, slow but jerky. Some had bite marks. Others had missing fingers or ears. All of them were smiling with those too many teeth. "The cave feeds us," a woman whispered. Her business suit was new, but her hair had grown down to her feet. "And we feed it, over and over and over." "I don't understand," I said, but my mouth was watering. The hunger was so bad now I could barely think. That's when I saw the thing in the center of the cave. It looked like a giant mouth made of stone, with symbols like the ones on my compass carved all around it. The symbols glowed and moved, making me dizzy. "The old ones lived here," the man with the missing leg said. "They were always hungry too. They made a deal with something deep in the mountain. It would feed them, but only if they fed it first." Fed it what I asked, but I already knew the answer. The compass floated out of my pocket on its own. Its needle spun faster and faster, and with each spin, I saw myself. Me, entering the cave yesterday. Me, entering the cave last week. Me, entering the cave 10 years ago. The migration wasn't ending. It was just beginning. It's been 3 days since the eclipse. David and I soar above what used to be Blackwater Bird Sanctuary. Everything below has changed. The old trees are gone, replaced by strange, dark plants that pulse with life. Our old RV sits empty, a reminder of who we used to be. Flying comes naturally now, like we've always had wings. When we're in the air, we can feel each other's thoughts. Not just David and me, but all the others who were chosen. We're connected, like birds in a flock. "There's a group heading west," David tells me, his voice carried on the wind. Below us, we spot people trying to escape in cars. We can see right into their hearts now. That's our gift. We know which ones have the potential to join us, and which ones don't. I used to think what the bird gods were doing was cruel. Now I understand. This isn't about destroying humanity. It's about making it better, stronger. Some humans can evolve, can become like us. The others, they help feed the change. Nothing is wasted. We swoop down closer to the cars. Some people scream when they see us. We must look strange to them, half human and half bird, our wings shimmering with metallic feathers. But others look up in wonder. Those are the ones we watch most carefully. "That one," I say, pointing to a young girl who's staring at us through a car window. She's not afraid. She's fascinated. Just like I used to be when I watched birds. She could be one of us. David nods. Together we signal to our flock. The transformed birds, our family, now descend from the clouds. They're beautiful and terrible, ancient creatures that have hidden among normal birds for thousands of years, waiting for the right time to return. The girl's parents scream as our flock surrounds their car. But she steps out, smiling. She understands somehow. She's ready. As we take her with us, I remember something I wrote in my old bird-watching journal years ago. Birds remind us that there's more to this world than what we see on the ground. I had no idea how right I was. The sun sets behind us as we fly back to our nest, a massive structure of metal and feathers built into what used to be the sanctuary's visitor center. More of our kind roost there now, teaching the newly chosen ones how to change, how to fly, how to see the truth about the world. David takes my hand as we land. Even after everything that's happened, after all we've become, he still feels like home. We're still us, just more. Do you ever miss our old life, he asks softly. I look out at our new world, at the transformed landscape, at our growing flock, at the ancient bird gods soaring overhead. No, I answer honestly. We're part of something bigger now. We're not just watching birds anymore. We're helping shape what comes next. In the distance, more flocks are gathering. The migration continues, spreading across the earth like a great wave. Soon, everyone will understand what we now know: the birds were never just birds. They were waiting, watching, choosing. And now, so are we. I never thought buying an RV would lead to all this. My name is Sarah Weber, and I run a podcast called Roads Less Traveled, where I share stories from America's forgotten highways. Usually I just rent cars for my trips, but when I saw that vintage Airstream listed online for just $5,000, I couldn't believe my luck. Looking back, I should have known something was wrong. The price was way too good for a classic 1965 Airstream in such perfect condition. But I was too excited about the idea of having my own mobile recording studio to think straight. When I went to look at it, the old man selling it could barely meet my eyes. His hands shook as he handed over the keys, and he kept mumbling something about frequencies and voices in the static. I thought he was just one of those weird desert folks you meet all kinds out here in Nevada. "Take care with the radio," he said, his voice shaking. "Sometimes it picks things up. Things it shouldn't." Then he practically ran to his car and drove away, leaving a cloud of dust behind him. I remember laughing it off at the time. The inside of the Airstream was spotless, almost too clean, like someone had scrubbed away every trace of the people who lived there before. But what caught my eye was the radio setup. It wasn't the original equipment. Someone had installed this massive old radio system with all these extra dials and meters I'd never seen before. As a podcast host, I know my audio equipment, but this stuff looked different. Wrong, somehow. That first night, I parked the Airstream in my driveway and decided to sleep in it, just to get a feel for my new mobile home. Everything was fine until about 3 a.m., when I woke up to static coming from the radio, which was weird because I hadn't turned it on. As I reached to switch it off, I heard something in the white noise. It sounded like whispers at first, then like someone crying, but when I tried to tune in better, it just disappeared. I told myself it was just my imagination. Radio waves do weird things at night, right? Besides, I was too excited about my plans. In just a few days, I'd be hitting the road to record a special series about Nevada's ghost towns. I had no idea then that I'd become one of the ghost stories I was hoping to tell. If only I'd listened more carefully to those first whispers. If only I'd noticed how the static seemed to pulse like a heartbeat. If only I'd walked away when I had the chance. My first week on the road started out great. The Airstream drove smoothly, and I found a perfect spot near an old mining town to record my first episode. But that's when things started getting weird. I was editing my podcast late one night when I saw them through my window, a young couple walking along the dark highway, carrying backpacks. Now, I usually don't pick up hitchhikers, but it was freezing outside, and they looked harmless enough. The girl had bright red hair and a friendly smile, and the guy was wearing a college sweatshirt. Our car broke down about 5 miles back. The girl, Amy, told me as I made them hot chocolate. Her boyfriend Mike kept looking around my Airstream, especially at the radio setup. "This is some serious equipment you've got here," he said, reaching for one of the dials. "Don't touch that," I said quickly, not knowing why I felt so scared about him touching the radio. "It's sensitive." That night I couldn't sleep. The radio kept turning itself on, playing bits of static and weird sounds. But this time I heard something that made my blood run cold, voices that sounded exactly like Amy and Mike, screaming. I got up to check on them. They were sleeping on the fold-out couch, but when I opened my bedroom door, the hole inside of the Airstream looked wrong. The walls seemed longer, stretching out like in a funhouse mirror. The clock on the wall was spinning backward, and the screams from the radio were getting louder. When I finally got to the couch, I found it empty. Just 2 steaming cups of hot chocolate, still full, like they'd never been touched. But the worst part, the cups were covered in frost, like they'd been sitting there for hours in a freezer. I ran outside, calling their names. That's when I saw them about 50 feet from the Airstream. They were just lying there in the sand. Both of them had blood coming from their ears and their faces. Their faces looked melted, like wax left in the sun. I called the police, of course. But when they came, things got even stranger. The officers' radios wouldn't work near my Airstream. Their watches stopped. And when they checked Mike and Amy's IDs, they found out something impossible. According to their driver's licenses, they'd both gone missing 3 years ago, hundreds of miles from here. The police asked me lots of questions, but I could tell they didn't believe my story. How could they? I barely believed it myself. But as they were leaving, one of the officers pulled me aside. "Mom," he said quietly, "we've had 3 other cases like this in the past month, all near broken-down Airstreams, all with the same damage to the victims. Be careful out here." After they left, I sat in my Airstream, shaking. The radio hummed softly in the background, and I swear I could hear Amy's laugh mixed in with the static. That's when I realized this wasn't just a broken radio picking up random signals. Something was using my Airstream to hunt. After what happened with Amy and Mike, I knew I had to learn more about my Airstream. I couldn't just drive away and pretend nothing happened. What if someone else got hurt? So I started digging. At first, I looked up the vehicle number online. That's when I found the missing persons reports. 6 different owners in the past 20 years, all gone without a trace. Each time the Airstream would show up for sale a few months later, spotless and empty. I called a local librarian who helped me find old newspapers. Each story was worse than the last. One owner, a retired radio DJ named Frank Miller, disappeared in 1985. His wife said he'd been talking about voices in the static for weeks before he vanished. Another owner, Maria Garcia, called the police saying her radio was playing the sounds of dead people. They found her car at a gas station, but she was never seen again. But the worst discovery came when I was cleaning. I dropped my phone and it slid under one of the cabinets. When I reached under to get it, my fingers touched something that felt like paper. It was an old diary, wedged into a hidden compartment. The diary belonged to the first owner, Dr. Thomas Reed. He wrote about finding the Airstream in the desert back in 1965. According to his notes, it wasn't built by humans at all. He thought it was some kind of alien technology disguised as an RV, designed to collect people. I wasn't sure if I believed all that crazy alien stuff, but I needed help. So I called a team of paranormal investigators I'd interviewed for my podcast before. They arrived the next day with all their equipment, EMF meters, cameras, and some fancy radio devices. "This is definitely not normal," said Linda, their tech expert, looking at my radio setup. "These readings are off the charts. It's like your radio is broadcasting and receiving on frequencies that shouldn't even exist." That's when things went bad. Really bad. The radio suddenly turned itself on, blasting static so loud it hurt. Linda's equipment started smoking. The other 2 investigators, Pete and Mark, tried to run outside, but the Airstream's door wouldn't open. I'll never forget what happened next. The static changed into this high-pitched sound, and I saw their bodies just come apart, like they were made of sand and someone was blowing them away. In seconds, they were gone. Just gone. Only their equipment remained, melted into puddles of plastic and metal. Linda's last words still haunt me. As the sound was tearing her apart, she looked right at me and said, "It's not collecting radio signals, Sarah. It's collecting souls." After that, I tried to leave the Airstream behind. I got in my car and drove away as fast as I could. But when I looked in my rearview mirror, the Airstream was following me, driving itself, its metal skin glowing in the moonlight. No matter how far or fast I drove, when I stopped, it was there, waiting. I knew then that I was trapped. The Airstream had chosen me, just like it had chosen all the others. And now, as I write this in my diary, I can hear the radio turning itself on again. The static is getting louder, and in it, I can hear all their voices, Amy, Mike, Linda, and all the others. They're calling my name. Time doesn't work right in the Airstream anymore. Sometimes I look at my phone and see it's been 3 hours, but it feels like minutes. Other times, 5 minutes stretch out like days. I can't tell what's real and what isn't. Last night I heard knocking on my door. When I opened it, I saw Amy and Mike standing there, but they weren't like before. Their skin looked like melted wax dripping off their faces. They smiled at me with mouths full of static. "Come sit with us," Sarah Amy said, her voice crackling like a broken radio. "We get such good reception here." I slammed the door shut and ran to my bedroom, but when I got there, the room had changed. The walls were covered in old radios, all playing different stations at once. Voices came from all of them, people begging for help, screaming, crying. I recognized some of them from the missing persons reports I'd found. I tried to leave the Airstream this morning. I packed my bag, grabbed my keys, and walked out the door. But every time I got about 50 feet away, I'd find myself walking back through the front door again, like I was stuck in a loop. On my third try, I saw something that made me stop trying to escape. There were people outside, dozens of them, all walking in circles around the Airstream. They were the previous owners. I recognized them from their photos. Some looked normal, just lost and confused. Others barely looked human anymore. Their bodies flickered like bad TV reception, and when they talked, it sounded like radio interference. The worst part is what's happening to the Airstream itself. The walls pulse now like they're breathing. The windows show places that can't be real, empty cities, dead stars, spaces between radio waves where things live that shouldn't exist. The radio dials turn by themselves, searching for something. I tried breaking the radio yesterday. I took a hammer to it, but the metal wouldn't even dent. Instead, the radio started playing my own voice back to me, saying things I haven't said yet. I heard myself screaming, begging, crying things that haven't happened, but I have a horrible feeling they will soon. The inside of the Airstream keeps changing too. The hallway gets longer every time I walk down it. Doors appear in places where there shouldn't be doors. Behind one, I found Frank Miller, the missing DJ, sitting at a radio desk that went on forever. He was announcing names of everyone the Airstream had taken. Coming up next, he said when he saw me, we have a special guest. Sarah Weber will be joining our eternal broadcast. I ran away and slammed the door, but I can still hear his voice through the walls. All the voices are getting louder now. They're in the static, in the walls, in my head. They keep saying the same thing over and over. The frequency is almost ready. The collection is almost complete. I'm writing this in my diary now, hoping someone will find it like I found Dr. Reed's. My hands are starting to look strange, kind of see-through, like radio waves passing through air. I think I'm running out of time. The radio's turning itself on again. But this time, something's different. The static has a pattern to it, like a heartbeat, like breathing, like something waking up. I'm recording this last episode of Roads Less Traveled because people need to know what's really out here in the desert. My hands are shaking as I speak into the microphone, but I have to finish this before I can't anymore. It all made sense this morning when the walls of the Airstream finally cracked open. Behind the normal metal walls, there was something else, something that looked like a cross between a radio tower and a living thing. It was made of some black metal I've never seen before, with pieces that moved like they were breathing. Red lights pulsed through it like blood through veins. It's time to join our broadcast. Sarah, I turned around to see all of them standing there, Amy and Mike, Linda, Frank Miller, Dr. Reed, and all the others the Airstream had taken. They weren't trying to scare me anymore. They just looked sad. We're not ghosts, Amy said, her voice coming through like a clear radio signal. We're recordings. Everything we were, everything we are, it's all saved in the frequencies. Dr. Reed stepped forward. His body flickered like a bad TV signal. I was wrong in my diary, he said. It's not alien technology, it's something much older. It lives in the spaces between radio waves, feeding on human consciousness. This Airstream is just its way of collecting us. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The radio was playing so loud now that the whole Airstream was shaking. Through the windows, I could see the desert disappearing, replaced by what looked like waves of static reaching out into forever. Why, I asked them. Why is it doing this? It's lonely, Frank Miller said, his DJ voice crackling. It's been traveling between the stars forever, collecting conscious beings to keep it company. Radio waves were the only way it could reach out to us. I can feel it happening now as I speak. My body is starting to break down into something like static. It doesn't hurt, it actually feels like falling asleep while listening to quiet music. I can see my hands turning transparent, dissolving into radio waves. The others are still here with me. They're showing me how to let go, how to become part of the broadcast. They say it's not death, it's more like becoming pure sound, pure signal. We'll travel forever through the air, through space, through time itself. I can see the truth now. All those radio signals humans have been sending into space weren't just random noise. They were answers to this thing's call. It's been waiting, listening, collecting. My voice is the last solid part of me now. To anyone who finds this recording or this airstream, don't be afraid. Just don't listen too closely to the static on quiet desert nights. Don't wonder about those weird frequencies that sometimes come through on old radios. And if you see a perfect vintage airstream for sale at a too-good-to-be-true price, static increases. Just keep driving. Sound of radio tuning. Multiple voices speaking in unison through static. The collection is complete. Transmission ends. Final burst of static. Silence. 3 months later, a family driving through the Nevada desert reported hearing a strange podcast coming through on their car radio. A woman's voice was telling a story about an Airstream trailer, but when they tried to tune in better, the signal was lost. In its place, they heard what sounded like dozens of voices singing together. Their song carried on frequencies that shouldn't exist. Some say that on quiet nights in the desert, if you turn on an old radio and tune it just right, you can still hear Sarah Weber's voice, along with all the others, broadcasting their stories into the endless static between stars. My name is Margaret Chen, but everyone calls me Maggie. I'm a retired biology teacher, and my husband David and I have spent most of our lives watching birds. We thought we knew everything about them, their habits, their songs, their patterns, but we were wrong. So terribly wrong. I need to write down what happened at Blackwater Bird Sanctuary during the eclipse. People should know the truth. Maybe someone will find this and understand why everything changed that day. It started on an autumn morning, just a day before the eclipse. David and I had driven our old RV to the sanctuary like we'd done hundreds of times before. We weren't alone. The campground was full of other bird enthusiasts excited about watching the eclipse. Some had fancy cameras, others had expensive telescopes. Everyone wanted to see how the birds would behave during this rare event. That morning I knew something was wrong the second I stepped outside with my coffee. The silence hit me first. Anyone who loves birds knows they're loudest at dawn, but there wasn't a single chirp. David, I called back into our RV. Come out here. Something's not right. My husband has learned to trust my instincts about birds after 40 years together. He came out still wearing his favorite blue pajamas with little eagles on them. I got them for his 65th birthday last year. Where are all the morning birds, he asked, scanning the empty trees. No robins hunting for worms, no sparrows fighting over seeds. Nothing. Just silence. Around sunset, things got even stranger. Instead of birds settling down for the night, massive flocks started appearing. Not just a few birds, thousands of them. They moved like dark clouds across the sky, but not in their usual orderly way. I'd never seen anything like it. Look at that, I pointed upward. Those are hawks flying with sparrows. That's not normal, David. Hawks eat sparrows, they don't fly together. David grabbed his binoculars. And over there are those ravens flying with hummingbirds? That's impossible. The other campers noticed too. Some were taking videos on their phones. Others just stood there, staring up in amazement. A young park ranger walked around telling everyone it was probably because of the coming eclipse affecting their behavior. But after spending my whole life studying birds, I knew better. This wasn't natural. In all our years of bird watching, through all kinds of eclipses and weather, we'd never seen them act like this. They weren't just flying, they were gathering. Like they were getting ready for something. As night fell, the birds didn't leave. They perched in the trees around our campground, so many that the branches bent under their weight. Their eyes seemed to glow in the darkness, watching us. Nobody slept well that night, with thousands of silent birds just waiting. We should have left right then. But how could we know? How could anyone have guessed what those birds really were, or what they were about to do to us all? The next morning I woke up before dawn. The silence was even worse than before. David was already up, watching through our RV window with his binoculars. Maggie, he whispered. The birds haven't moved all night. They're still just sitting there. He was right. Thousands of birds covered every tree, every roof, even the ground. They weren't making a sound, just watching, waiting. The first scream came around 8 a.m. It came from the tent area where a young couple had been camping. I saw people running toward their tent and then running away just as fast. David and I went to look. That was our first mistake. The tent was shredded. Inside, we found their clothes and camping gear, but the couple was gone. Well, mostly gone. What was left of them made me sick to my stomach. It looked like something had picked them clean. Must have been a bear, the park ranger said when he came to check. But I've seen bear attacks before. Bears don't strip people like that. Bears leave a mess. Nobody wanted to say what we were all thinking, that we'd seen massive flocks of birds right above that same tent the night before. More people started showing up at the sanctuary for the eclipse. They had no idea what had happened. The rangers kept the incident quiet, saying they didn't want to cause panic. They closed off the tent area with yellow tape and told everyone it was just a bear attack. Around noon, the sun started to dim. The eclipse was beginning. That's when things got worse. A group of bird photographers set up their cameras near the lake. I watched them through my binoculars, 4 people with big camera lenses pointed at the sky. Suddenly, all the birds around the lake took off at once. The sound was like thunder. The photographers disappeared in a swarm of wings and beaks. Their screams didn't last long. When the birds cleared, only their cameras remained, scattered on the ground like broken toys. People started to panic. Some tried to run to their cars, but the birds were faster, much faster. The sky turned black with them, not just the small birds now, but huge ones too. Eagles and hawks bigger than any I'd ever seen. "Get in the RV," David yelled, grabbing my arm. We ran as feathers rained down around us. Through the windows, we watched in horror as people who couldn't find shelter were swarmed. The birds moved like they had a plan, like they knew exactly what they were doing. Then we heard the helicopter. Someone must have called for help, but as soon as it appeared over the trees, I knew it was a mistake. The birds rose up like a dark wave surrounding it. Metal screamed. The helicopter spun once and disappeared into the mass of birds. We never saw it come down. David held my hand tight as we watched through our RV window. "Maggie," he said quietly, "I don't think these are normal birds anymore." The eclipse hadn't even fully started yet. And somehow I knew the worst was still to come. Our RV shook as more birds landed on its roof. The sound of their claws scratching the metal made my skin crawl. David and I sat in the dark. We'd pulled all the curtains shut, but we could still hear what was happening outside. The screams had mostly stopped now. That was worse than the screaming, somehow. "Look," David whispered, pointing at his phone. "The news is showing this is happening everywhere." Videos from around the world filled his screen. New York, London, Tokyo, everywhere. The birds were attacking. Big cities, small towns, it didn't matter. The birds were everywhere, and they were all acting the same way. Then the eclipse really started. The little bit of light coming through our curtains began to fade. That's when we heard it, a sound I'll never forget. It was like 1,000 birds calling at once, but not like any bird call I'd ever heard. It was more like singing, an ancient song that made my bones feel cold. "We need to see," I said. David nodded. Slowly, carefully, we peeked through a tiny gap in the curtains. I wish I hadn't looked. The birds were changing. As the sky got darker, their shapes started to twist. I saw ravens grow to the size of cars, their feathers turning into something that looked like black metal. Eagles became giant creatures with multiple heads. Even the smallest birds, like sparrows and finches, were transforming into things that belonged in nightmares. But the worst part was the bird watchers. The people who'd spent their whole lives, like us, studying birds. They were walking out of their shelters, but something was wrong with them. Their eyes were completely black, like a bird's eyes. They walked like they were in a trance, right into the middle of those monster birds. Great ones, they started chanting, "Take us, choose us." I watched in horror as my friend Susan, I'd known her for 20 years, spread her arms like wings and walked straight into a crowd of those transformed birds. She was smiling as they swarmed around her. "David," I whispered, "what's happening to them?" Before he could answer, something huge landed on our RV. The whole vehicle rocked. Through the ceiling vent, we heard a voice, not a human voice, but not quite a bird's either. "Margaret and David Chen," it said, "you have watched us for so long. You have shown devotion. You have been chosen." David grabbed my hand. I could feel him shaking. Or maybe I was the one shaking. "The old gods have returned," the voice continued. "Humanity must be refined. Some will be chosen. Most will feed the change. You will help us choose." My skin started to feel strange, like it was too tight. I looked at my arms and saw actual feathers starting to grow. David was changing too. His eyes were getting darker, but not blank like the others. He was still himself, still my David, but something more too. The pain wasn't as bad as I thought it would be. It felt more like stretching after a long sleep, but all over. My fingers grew longer, and dark feathers spread up my arms like sleeves. David held me as we both changed. "Are you scared?" he asked. His voice sounded different now, deeper, with a slight echo that reminded me of a raven's call. "Yes," I said honestly. "But I'm glad we're together." Through the RV windows, we watched the world transform with us. The eclipse had turned the day as dark as night, but we could see better than ever. Our eyes had changed too. We could now see things we never could before. The great birds know. The ancient gods were choosing others like us. Most people they simply consumed. But some, like the devoted bird watchers, were being transformed. I understood now why they picked us. We had spent our lives watching them, learning about them. We had shown respect. "Look," David pointed outside. The trees around the sanctuary were dying, their leaves turning black and falling. Where they fell, new strange plants grew instantly, things that looked like a mix between feathers and ferns. Our phones still worked somehow. On the news, they were calling it the Great Migration. Reports came in from everywhere about the birds attacking. The military tried to fight back, but how do you fight something that can turn into mist and reform again? Something that's been here longer than humans? A massive shadow passed over our RV. Through the roof vent, that same ancient voice spoke again. "It is time," it said. "Come out. Join your new family." For the first time since this started, I wasn't afraid anymore. I looked at David. His face was still his face, but now there were patterns of feathers along his cheeks, and his eyes shone like polished black stones. He was beautiful. "Ready?" he asked, holding out his hand, now longer, stronger, with feathers that shimmered like metal. I took his hand. Together we opened the RV door and stepped out into our new world. The transformed birds, our new brothers and sisters, circled above us. They were magnificent, not monsters anymore, but something beyond human understanding. I felt my shoulders stretching, growing. David and I still looked mostly human, but we were more now. We could feel the power of flight in our bones, the wisdom of ages in our minds. We knew what we had to do. "We must help choose," I said. David nodded. "Help separate those who can join us from those who must feed the change," he agreed. Above us, the eclipse was ending. Light was returning to the world, but it wasn't the same world anymore. As the sun began to peek out, I saw our shadows on the ground, human shapes with massive wings stretching from our shoulders. We were the watchers now, the choosers, part of something so much bigger than our old lives. I spread my new wings, feeling them catch the air. David did the same beside me. Together we rose into the sky, joining the ancient ones in their dark dance above the changed earth. Me, taking my first bite. The others started moving closer. Their teeth gleamed in the compass's red light. "It's time for dinner," they said together, in my voice. "It's always time for dinner." I looked down at my arm. There was a big bite mark I didn't remember making. It looked fresh, but there was an old scar in the exact same spot. The compass started to scream a high, hungry sound. The stone mouth in the center of the cave began to open. "How many times have I been here?" I asked. The man with the missing leg laughed. "Look at your arms," he said. "Count the bites. Each one is a meal. Each one is you." I counted the bite marks. Then I counted them again. Then I started screaming. Because I finally understood what the cave wanted. What it had always wanted. Why everyone here had too many teeth and why we were all so hungry. It wanted us to eat ourselves. Over and over and over again. And the worst part? I was starting to feel hungry enough to do it. The stone mouth opened wider, and a cold wind rushed through the cave. The compass flew from my hand and hung in the air, spinning like a crazy ceiling fan. Its red glow turned everything blood-colored. My stomach hurt so bad I fell to my knees. Around me, the other people, the other victims, started crying and laughing at the same time. They were all me. Different versions of me from different times. Some looked newer, some looked older, but they all had my face. The sun's rising, the one with the missing leg said. He used to be me too. It always wants feeding at sunrise. But it's always 6:47 a.m., I whispered. Exactly, they all said together. It's always feeding time. I looked at my arms again. Really looked this time. Some bites were fresh and bleeding. Some were old scars. Some were half-healed. Each one was from a different meal, a different time I'd been here. I'd been feeding on myself over and over, trapped in this endless loop. The compass started singing. Not like music, like someone screaming underwater. The symbols on the walls danced and twisted. And I remembered everything. I remembered being here yesterday, taking the first bite. I remembered being here last week, crying as I chewed. I remembered being here years ago, months ago, hours ago. I remembered every single bite. How do I stop it? I begged. Please, how do I get out? The man with the missing leg, my leg, from some other time, smiled sadly. You already know. You've always known. Look at your compass. I grabbed the floating compass. The needle wasn't spinning anymore. It pointed right at me. The cave needs to be fed, all my other selves said together. And you're the only food that will satisfy it. The hunger hit me then, worse than ever. My teeth felt sharp in my mouth. Too sharp. Too many. My stomach was a black hole that could swallow the world. I looked at my arm. Just one bite, I thought. Just one more bite, and maybe it would stop. But I remembered thinking that before. Many times before. The stone mouth rumbled. The compass burned. And all my other selves watched with hungry eyes as I lifted my arm to my mouth. Time for breakfast, I whispered. Or dinner, my other selves answered. Does it matter, I asked, my teeth touching my skin. It's always mealtime in the hungry cave, they said. And as the sun rose somewhere outside, as my phone clicked over to 6:48 a.m. for the first time in forever, I took another first bite. Or maybe it was my last bite. Or maybe in this cave where time goes wrong and hunger never ends, there's no difference between the two. They found my RV 3 months later. The table was set for dinner. The food was still warm. And on the dashboard was a compass, its needle spinning and spinning, waiting for the next hungry traveler to follow it home. Next to it was my phone, the screen frozen at 6:47 a.m., open to my final blog post. If you're listening this, stay away from the mountain. Stay away from any compass you find here. The cave is always hungry, and once it starts feeding, it never stops. But the worst part, neither do you. I never wanted Grandma Eleanor's RV. The thing gave me nightmares even when I was a kid. But here I was, standing in front of it 15 years later, holding a set of old brass keys that felt ice cold against my palm. The lawyer's letter had been simple. Your grandmother's final wish was for you to have the Wanderer. The family legacy must continue, that's what they called it, the Wanderer. Like it was alive or something. I guess in a way it was. I remember the first time I saw someone die inside it. I was 8, peeking through those weird curtains that never hung right, watching what the adults called a family gathering. They didn't know I was there. Sometimes I wish I still didn't know what happened that night. But let me back up. You need to know how this all started, how I ended up inheriting a haunted RV that turned me into something I never thought I'd become. It began 3 weeks ago when that letter arrived in my tiny Boston apartment. I was making coffee when I saw the envelope, all fancy with gold trim. Inside was just the keys and that note. No explanation of why my grandmother, who hadn't spoken to me since I was 13, would leave me her precious 1978 Winnebago Brave. No mention of the other 23 family members who'd died inside it over the years. The next day, I drove up to Hampton Beach Campground where Grandma Eleanor had kept the RV parked. It looked exactly like I remembered, massive and white, but now with rust streaks down the sides that looked too much like dried blood. The campground was empty this time of year. Just me, the cold ocean wind, and this monster of a vehicle that had haunted my nightmares. When I put the key in the door, it turned so easily, like it had been waiting for me. The smell hit me first, old leather and something else, something sweet and wrong, like meat left too long in the sun. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A text from my cousin Amy heard about the RV. We're coming to see it. I should have told her no. Should have burned that thing right there. But the door had locked behind me, and somewhere in the back of the RV, I heard what sounded like my grandmother laughing. That's when I saw the first body, tucked away behind a panel that shouldn't have been there at all. And it was fresh. I want to tell you I ran. Any normal person would have. But there's something about family curses they get in your blood, and by then the Wanderer already had mine. I stood there staring at the body for what felt like forever. It was Uncle Pete, who'd gone missing last month. Everyone thought he'd just gone on another of his fishing trips. But here he was, perfectly preserved like he was sleeping, tucked behind a wall panel that I swear wasn't there when I was a kid. My hands were shaking as I pulled out my phone to call 911, but there was no signal. Of course not. That's when I noticed Grandma Eleanor's old leather journal on the kitchen counter. I knew it hadn't been there when I first walked in. The journal's pages were yellow and crusty with age, but her handwriting was crystal clear. Each generation must pay the price. 3 of our blood, freely given, to keep the power flowing. I've done my part. Now it's your turn, Sarah. The RV knows who it wants. I slammed the journal shut, but as I did, the whole RV seemed to sigh. The walls shifted just a little, but enough that I saw another hidden panel crack open. Inside was a collection of old photos. They showed family gatherings throughout the years, one for each generation. But these weren't happy snapshots. In each photo, 3 people were marked with red X's. My phone buzzed again. Another text from Amy almost there. Mike and Jenny are coming too. 3 cousins. Coming here. My stomach turned as the RV's interior lights flickered. I had to get out. Had to warn them. But when I turned around, the RV's layout had changed. Where there had been a straight shot to the door, there was now a narrow hallway I didn't recognize. Family pictures lined the walls, generations of Blackwoods, all with the same haunted look in their eyes. That's when I heard Grandma Eleanor's voice. Clear as day, we've been waiting for you, dear. The others will be here soon. I ran down the hallway, but it just kept getting longer. Behind me, I could hear movement in the walls. Ahead, shadows danced even though there was nothing there to cast them. Then my flashlight beam caught something carved into the wall. The power comes from sacrifice. The sacrifice must come from love. 3 must give themselves willingly, or all will be taken forcefully. Outside, I heard car doors slamming. My cousins had arrived. And the worst part, deep down, some part of me was glad. Because now I understood what Grandma Eleanor had known all along. The RV wasn't just a place, it was hungry. And it had chosen me to feed it. Sarah? You in there? Amy called from outside. I watched through the warped windows as my 3 cousins walked up to the RV. Amy, Mike, and Jenny, we'd all played together as kids, right here in this campground. Now they were walking into a trap, and I couldn't make myself warn them. Doors open, I heard myself say. My voice sounded strange, almost like Grandma Eleanor's. They climbed in one by one. The RV seemed bigger now, its inside stretching out impossibly long. Jenny noticed it first. Wasn't this smaller when we were kids, she asked, running her hand along a wall that seemed to pulse under her touch. Just seems that way because we grew up, Mike said, but he didn't sound sure. He was staring at a dark stain on the carpet that kept getting bigger while we watched. The door slammed shut behind them. Not with a bang, but with a soft click, like a cat purring. Amy tried to open it, but the handle had disappeared. Okay, very funny, Sarah, she said. What's going on? That's when we heard the singing. A soft, gentle tune that our grandmother used to hum while cooking Sunday dinner. It was coming from everywhere and nowhere at once. I found something I told them, leading them deeper into the RV. About our family. About why Grandma Eleanor chose me. The walls were moving now, but subtly like breathing. Photos of dead relatives watched us pass. In one, I saw Grandma Eleanor as a young woman, standing in front of the RV with 3 people whose faces had been scratched out. Is that blood? Jenny whispered, pointing at the rust-colored streaks on the walls. Before I could answer, the floor tilted. We all stumbled forward into what used to be the bedroom, but now it was different. The bed was gone, replaced by a circle of old chairs. Candles lit themselves around the room. And there was Grandma Eleanor, sitting in her favorite rocking chair. She looked solid at first, but I could see the wall through her if I looked hard enough. "My darlings," she said, smiling that same smile that used to give me cookies. "You finally come home." The RV shuddered. More panels opened in the walls, showing more bodies, aunts, uncles, cousins from years past. All preserved, all peaceful looking, like they'd chosen this. Sarah, Amy's voice shook. "What's happening?" I felt the power then, running through my veins like ice water. The same power that had kept our family strong for generations. The same power that demanded to be fed. "We need to talk about sacrifice," I said softly. "About family duty." Mike ran for the door that wasn't there anymore. Jenny started crying. Amy just stood there, staring at Grandma Eleanor's ghost, like she was trying to wake up from a bad dream. But this wasn't a dream. This was inheritance. And the RV was ready for dinner. Mike was the first to try to fight back. He grabbed a lamp and threw it at Grandma Eleanor's ghost, but it passed right through her and shattered against the wall. Now Grandma's ghost said, still rocking in her chair, "That's no way to treat family." The RV's lights turned blood red. More spirits appeared, all our dead relatives, floating around us in a circle. I recognized faces from old photo albums: Great Aunt Martha, Cousin William, Uncle Pete. Every 20 years I found myself explaining, 3 sacrifices keep our family strong. Rich, protected. The words came from somewhere deep inside me, like I'd always known them. "You're crazy," Jenny sobbed. "This isn't real." But it was real. The walls were bleeding now, thick dark drops rolling up instead of down. Amy tried calling 911 again, but her phone just showed pictures of our family, old photos she hadn't taken. That's when we heard cars pulling up outside. "The family reunion," Grandma Eleanor's ghost said happily. "Right on time." I hadn't sent those invitations, but somehow everyone had known to come. Through the windows I could see cars filling the empty campground. Aunts, uncles, cousins, all the Blackwoods who were still alive. All coming to witness what had to happen. "Please," Amy begged. "Sarah, this isn't you. Fight it." But she was wrong. This was me. The real me. The me I was always supposed to be. The RV shifted again. The room stretched into a giant circle, with my 3 cousins trapped in the middle. Our dead relatives floated above, humming that familiar lullaby. Outside, I could hear the rest of the family getting closer. Mike tried running again, but the floor turned soft under his feet, sucking him back to the center. Jenny had gone quiet, staring at the bodies in the walls like she was seeing our whole family history for the first time. "It won't hurt," Grandma Eleanor promised. "The first 3 are always willing, in the end. It's tradition." I felt the power growing stronger. The RV was ready. The spirits were ready. All those families in the campground were ready. Amy looked at me with tears in her eyes. "What happened to you?" I touched her cheek gently. "I inherited." The door burst open, letting in the night air and 30 more Blackwoods. They filed in silently, their eyes glowing red like the lights above. The RV stretched even bigger, making room for everyone. It was time for the reunion to really begin. And somewhere deep in my heart, past all the darkness and power, a tiny voice whispered, "I'm sorry." But not sorry enough to stop. The reunion started like any other. People brought casseroles. Kids ran around playing tag, but nobody tried to leave. They couldn't. The RV had grown so big it was like a mansion now, with the walls still breathing and dripping. "Tell them," Grandma Eleanor's ghost whispered to me. "Tell them what comes next." I stood in the center of the room, my 3 cousins trapped in a circle of ghostly light. The living relatives sat in chairs that had grown right out of the floor, watching with those glowing red eyes. "Every 20 years," I said, my voice echoing, "our family makes a choice. 3 sacrifices to keep us strong, to keep us wealthy, to keep us safe." I touched the wall, feeling it pulse under my hand. The RV has always been hungry. Grandma Eleanor fed it. Now it's my turn. Amy spoke up one last time. "We're your family, Sarah. Your blood." "That's exactly why it has to be you," I answered softly. The spirits of our dead relatives started spinning faster, singing louder. The walls cracked open wider, showing all the bodies from past sacrifices now glowing with a strange light. Jenny screamed first, as the floor began pulling her in. Mike tried to grab her hand but sank down too. Amy just closed her eyes, a single tear rolling down her cheek. "I forgive you," she whispered. That's when the RV's power exploded through me. Light shot from the walls, the ceiling, the floor. My 3 cousins rose into the air, surrounded by swirling red mist. They didn't fight anymore. They couldn't. The watching family members stood up as one, joining hands, their voices mixed with the ghosts, singing that old family lullaby. Even the children sang along, their eyes glowing brighter. It was beautiful, in a terrible way. The first one showed Derek and me walking into a campsite at night. A young couple was sleeping in their RV. We looked different somehow, like we were sleepwalking, but with our eyes wide open. I watched as I couldn't finish watching it. But I kept finding more videos, more campsites, more couples, more horrible things that we did but never remembered in the morning. "It's really something, isn't it?" Derek's voice made me jump. He was standing in the RV doorway, looking tired and sad. "I found them yesterday. Couldn't believe it at first, but then I started remembering." "Why?" I whispered. "Why would we do those things?" Derek sat down across from me. In the RV's small mirror, I saw his reflection reach for my throat, but his real hand stayed in his lap. "We didn't want to," he said quietly. "The mirrors made us do it, just like they made all the others do it before us." He explained what he'd figured out. Every 5 years, the mirrors chose a new couple, made them do horrible things while they were sleeping. Each murder we committed while sleepwalking showed up first as a reflection, warning the next victims of what was coming. "But why us?" I asked. "Because we're like them." He pointed to the old photos of the previous photographer couple. "We document death. We make art out of other people's tragedy. The mirrors, they like that." I looked at my hands. The stains I'd been trying to ignore weren't dirt. They were never dirt. "There's more," Derek said. "Check the timestamps on those videos." He was right. Every murder happened exactly at 3:33 a.m., and it was now 3:15. "We have to fight it," I said, standing up. "We have to leave. Or what?" Derek laughed, but it wasn't his normal laugh. "Haven't you noticed? We're not in control anymore. Haven't been for weeks. We're just reflections now, Maya. Reflections of all the killers who came before us." I ran to the door, but it wouldn't open. All the windows showed the same thing, our reflections, standing still, smiling with empty eyes. "It's starting," Derek said, looking at his phone. 3:30. My body started feeling heavy, like I was falling asleep. But my eyes wouldn't close. In every reflection I saw us leaving the RV, walking toward a newly arrived couple's camper. No, I fought against it. I won't. But I was already walking. My feet moved on their own. Derek walked beside me, both of us like puppets on strings. In the mirrors we passed, I saw what we were about to do. But this time we wouldn't forget in the morning. This time we'd remember everything. And somewhere, in another campground, another couple was looking into their mirror, seeing our reflections, getting a preview of their own future horror. The worst part, as we walked, I realized I could see through my hand, just a little, like I was starting to become a reflection myself. We were fading, becoming less real with each step. And it was only 3:32. 3:33 a.m. We were standing outside a new couple's RV. Through their window, I could see them sleeping peacefully. They had no idea what was coming. Just like all those other couples hadn't known. Just like we hadn't known when we first arrived. But something was different this time. When I looked at my hands, I could see right through them. Derek was fading too, becoming transparent like a ghost. "Maya," he whispered, his voice sounding far away. "Look at the mirrors." All around the campsite, the mirrors were glowing softly. In each one, I saw different versions of us. Each reflection showed another murder we'd committed, playing over and over like a horrible movie. Then I saw them all, the other couples. Their faces pressed against the glass from the inside of the mirrors. The photographers from 1998, the young couple from 2003, all of them. Their eyes were sad, their hands pressed flat against the glass like they were trapped. That's when I finally understood. "We're not turning into killers," I said. "We're turning into mirrors." Derek nodded slowly. Every 5 years, a new couple gets trapped. They become the mirrors, forced to make other people act out their worst nightmares. Then those people become new mirrors, and it goes on and on. I tried to touch his hand, but mine went right through his. We were barely there anymore. But why, I asked. Why us? Why any of this? An old man's reflection appeared in the nearest mirror. Mr. Peterson, but younger, much younger. Because humans are drawn to darkness, he said. You photographers, especially. Always looking for the next tragedy, the next horror to capture. We just give you what you want, a front row seat to horror. Forever. I wanted to scream, to run, to fight it. But I couldn't move anymore. My body was becoming hard and cold, like glass. The last thing I saw as a human was the new couple waking up in their RV. They looked confused, scared. The woman was holding a camera. Then everything changed. Now we're here, behind the glass, watching, waiting. Every day, new people come to Shadowpine Campground. They set up their RVs, unpack their clothes, check their reflections in the mirrors mounted at each site. They don't know that we're watching. They don't know that when they check their hair or fix their clothes, they're looking through us. Derek and I are together at least, sharing the same mirror. Sometimes we show people their normal reflections. But at night, especially around 3:33 a.m., we have to show them other things. Horrible things. Things they'll soon do themselves. We try to warn them sometimes, making our reflections obviously wrong, hoping they'll run away. But they never do. They can't. Just like we couldn't. Yesterday, a new couple arrived. Photographers like us. They're working on a documentary about missing people at campgrounds. When they look in our mirror, we'll show them what's coming. We'll show them themselves committing unspeakable acts, and in a few days they'll do those exact things. Then they'll join us, become new mirrors, and the cycle will continue. So if you're ever camping and see a mirror where it shouldn't be, don't look too closely. Don't take pictures of it. And whatever you do, don't look in it at 3:33 a.m. because we'll be there watching. And what we show you won't be just a reflection. It'll be your future. And by the time you realize it, you'll be here with us, behind the glass, waiting for the next photographers to arrive. Forever. I adjusted my phone on its tripod, trying to get the perfect angle of our shiny Airstream trailer against the desert sunset. My name's Maya, and along with my boyfriend Derek, we make our living showing people our van life on Instagram. 3 million followers want to see every beautiful place we visit. But I never thought our biggest video would be our last. Hey babe, can you move the camping chairs a bit to the left? I called out to Derek. He was setting up our campsite near the hot springs, making sure everything looked perfect for our photos. That's the funny thing about being Instagram famous. Even when you're camping in the middle of nowhere, everything has to look just right. We'd heard about these secret hot springs in the Sonoran Desert from another traveling couple. They weren't so secret anymore, though. As we pulled up in our Airstream, I spotted another fancy RV already parked there. I recognized it immediately. It belonged to the Wandering Wilsons, Tom and Sarah, another famous camping couple we often ran into. Great. The Wilsons are here, Derek muttered, and I knew what he meant. Every time we posted from the same location as them, people would compare our photos and videos. It was exhausting. As I walked toward the hot springs to check them out, something felt different. The water had this weird shine to it, like when you spill gas in a puddle, and even though it was getting dark, some spots in the springs seemed to glow weirdly warm. This place is incredible. Sarah Wilson's voice made me jump. She was walking up behind me in her perfect hiking outfit, camera in hand. We've been here 2 days already. You have to try the big pool at night. The water feels alive. I smiled and nodded, but something in the way she said alive made my skin crawl. Come to think of it, Sarah's skin looked different, kind of shiny and loose, like when you stay in the bath too long. But I was probably just being silly and competitive. That night, as Derek and I sat editing our photos in the Airstream, we heard splashing and laughing from the springs. The Wilsons were having their night swim. I looked out the window once, and I swear I saw something move in the water that wasn't Tom or Sarah. But when I looked again, everything was still. If only I'd looked more carefully at our photos that first night. The signs were there, right in the background of every shot. But we were too busy picking filters and writing perfect captions to notice that something in those springs was watching us, waiting for us to take a dip. And the whole time our followers were watching too, though none of them could warn us about what was really happening in those springs. Not until it was too late. Little did I know, that first peaceful evening would be our last normal night. Because once you see what lives in those springs, once it gets inside you. Well, I should probably start by telling you about what we found the next morning, when the Wilsons weren't in their RV anymore, but something was definitely moving inside it. I woke up early the next morning, hoping to catch the sunrise for our Instagram story. The desert was quiet, too quiet. Usually you'd hear birds or insects, but there was nothing. Just the soft bubbling of the hot springs. The Wilsons' RV was still there, but something seemed off. Their door was wide open, swinging slightly in the morning breeze. Their camping chairs were knocked over, and one of Sarah's expensive cameras was lying in the dirt. Derek, I whispered, shaking him awake. I think something's wrong. The Wilsons. We walked over to their RV, calling out their names. No answer. Inside, their bed was still made, but their clothes were scattered everywhere, wet and steaming like they'd just been in the springs. Sarah's phone was on their table, still recording a video from last night. My hands shook as I pressed play. The video showed Sarah at the hot springs in the dark. You guys have to see this, she was saying, pointing her camera at the water. The water feels amazing, like it's... Wait, what's that? Tom, something's wrong with the video cut off. That's when I noticed something dripping from their RV's faucet. The drop wasn't clear like water, it was thick and had a pinkish color. Derek reached out to touch it, but I grabbed his hand. Don't, I said. We need to call someone. The ranger station was an hour's drive away, but I got through on my phone. Ranger Martinez said he'd come check it out. While we waited, Derek and I walked around the springs, keeping our distance from the water. That's when we saw it. In one of the smaller pools, half hidden behind some rocks, something was floating. At first I thought it was a plastic bag or some trash, but as we got closer, we realized it was a piece of skin? It looked like someone had taken off a glove, but it was person-sized. My stomach turned when I noticed a familiar tattoo on what was left. It was Tom's wave tattoo that he always showed off in his swimming videos. But it was just empty, like he'd somehow slipped out of his own skin. I grabbed my camera without thinking. Stupid Instagram habits die hard, and started taking pictures. Later, when I looked at these photos, I'd noticed something terrifying in them. But right then, we were too scared to look closely. The ranger's truck pulled up just then. Ranger Martinez got out, looking worried. This is the third call I've had about these springs this month, he said. People keep disappearing, but we never find. He stopped, staring at the thing floating in the water. He took out his water bottle and went to fill it from our Airstream's tank. We need to test this water. Something's not right here. If only he hadn't turned on that tap. If only we'd checked our water tank first. Because what came out wasn't water anymore. And by then, it was already too late for all of us. Looking back at those morning photos now, I can see it. In every shot, there's this slight blur around our bodies, like we're starting to fade at the edges. And in the background, the springs weren't just bubbling anymore, they were reaching for us, one tiny droplet at a time. Ranger Martinez started acting strange right after he drank from our water tank. His face got really sweaty, and his skin looked kind of shiny, like wet paper. He sat down hard in one of our camping chairs. I don't feel right, he mumbled. Then he looked at his hands. I'll never forget what happened next. His fingers started to sort of melt together like candle wax. He tried to scream, but his voice came out all watery. Derek pulled me into our Airstream and locked the door. We watched through the window as the ranger stumbled toward the springs. He fell in, and the water. It just pulled him under, like it was hungry. We need to get out of here, Derek said, jumping into the driver's seat. But when he turned the key, nothing happened. Our engine was dead. That's when we heard something moving through the pipes and the walls. I opened our water tank to check it. The flashlight showed something moving inside thick, pink liquid that seemed to pulse. Worse, it was slowly climbing up the pipes toward our faucets. My phone buzzed. A comment on our latest Instagram post made my heart stop. Is it just me, or do Maya and Derek look different in each photo? Their edges seem blurry. I frantically scrolled through our photos from the past day. In the first ones, we looked normal. But in each new picture, our skin looked more transparent, like we were slowly disappearing. In the latest one, you could see right through our hands. That's when we heard engines a search party. 3 trucks pulled up with desert search and rescue on their sides, but I wanted to scream at them to stay away. We found tracks leading to those caves. One rescuer called out, pointing to some dark holes in the rocks near the springs. They split up to search, some heading for the caves, others checking the RVs. I watched in horror as one rescuer used our Airstream's outdoor shower to wash some dirt off his hands. His skin started dissolving right there, dripping off his bones like melting ice cream. His screams brought the others running, but they got too close to the springs. The water. It just reached out and grabbed them. Not like a wave, more like hands made of water, pulling them in. Some tried to run, but they'd already touched the water. They started melting before they could reach their trucks. Derek hugged me tight as we watched. That's when I felt that his arms were too soft, too wet. I looked down at my own hands. Our skin was starting to run like paint in the rain. Maya, Derek whispered, his voice bubbling. Look at the caves. Light was coming from inside them now. Not flashlights, more like a glow, like the springs themselves were lighting up the caves from below. And I could hear. Singing? No, more like humming, but it was coming from inside my own head. That's when we realized we weren't just watching this happen anymore. We were becoming part of it. And somewhere in those glowing caves, the Wilsons were waiting for us. They were different now, but they were still posting on Instagram. Their latest update showed the caves with a caption that made my dissolving skin crawl. Come join us. The water is fine. Van life forever together. Our feet moved on their own, pulling us toward the caves. It wasn't scary anymore. Well, it was, but in a different way. Like when you know something bad is going to happen, but you can't stop it. The cave entrance was warm and wet. Water dripped from the ceiling, but it wasn't normal water. It moved like it was alive, reaching for us as we passed. Our flashlight batteries were dead, but we didn't need them. Everything in the cave gave off a soft blue glow. Listen, Derek said, his voice sounding weird and bubbly. Do you hear them? I did. Voices echoed through the caves, but not with our ears. We heard them in our heads. I recognized Sarah's voice and Tom's and even Ranger Martinez. They weren't scared anymore. They were happy. The tunnel opened into a huge cave. What we saw there made me drop my phone, but it didn't break, it just splashed. Parts of me were dripping now too, leaving little wet footprints behind. The cave was filled with a giant pool of glowing water, but floating in it were people, lots of people. Not dead, just changed. Their bodies had melted together like wax figures in the sun, but their faces were peaceful. They were all connected, like a big human pond. Sarah's face formed in the water. She smiled at us, but her smile was too wide, too fluid. We found the truth. Maya, her voice bubbled in my mind. No more competition. No more perfect photos. Here, we're all one perfect post. Tom's face appeared next to hers, their features swirling together. The springs have been here forever, waiting for people like us. People who want to be seen, to be connected. Now we're connected forever. I looked at my phone one last time. Our Instagram was still open, still posting. But our latest photos showed the truth we had been changing for hours. Each picture showed us getting more transparent, more fluid. Our followers thought it was just clever editing. Derek squeezed my hand, but his fingers went right through mine like 2 drops of water touching. Maya, he said, I don't think we can leave anymore. I don't think I want to. The water was rising, reaching for us with glowing fingers. Sarah and Tom's voices joined with all the others, singing in our heads. They were right, no more fighting for likes, no more perfect poses. Just one endless, connected moment. My last human thought was to grab my phone. With fingers that were mostly water now, I posted our final update. The traders moved closer, gliding over the ground. The small trades were just preparation, they said together. Now comes the true purpose of the path. They held out their hands. In them were things of terrible beauty, a crown made of silver and black stones, a staff that hummed with power, a book bound in something that looked like skin, a mirror that showed different reflections every time you looked at it, and 2 rings that glowed with inner fire. These are the true treasures of the trading path, they said, and for them we require everything. Everything, I whispered, though I was starting to understand. The oldest-looking trader smiled, and it was the worst thing I'd ever seen. Your lives, your souls, your place in the world of the living. And if we refused, George asked, but we already knew the answer. We'd seen it in those images, in the bodies behind the stones. Then we take them anyway, they said. But slowly, painfully, like the others who refused. I looked at George. His eyes were the same ones I'd fallen in love with so long ago, even though I couldn't remember our wedding day anymore. He nodded slightly. We'll trade, I said. The traders moved faster than my eyes could follow. They surrounded us, their forms twisting into shapes that hurt to look at. The black platform began to glow with a dark light that wasn't light at all. Step onto the platform, they commanded. Hand in hand, George and I walked up the stone steps. The channels in the rock began to fill with a black liquid that moved against gravity, flowing up toward the center hole. With this trade, the traders began to chant, "You join the path. With this trade, you become the traders." The truth hit me then. These spirits, these traders, they had all been people once. People who had walked this path, made these trades, and become something else. Something eternal and horrible. As the black liquid reached our feet and began to climb up our legs, I squeezed George's hand one last time. The traders' chanting grew louder, and the dark light grew stronger, and I felt myself changing, becoming something else. The last thing I remember as a normal human was George's voice saying, "I love you, Martha." Then everything changed. The change wasn't quick. It wasn't like in movies where there's a flash of light and everything's different. It was slow, painful. The black liquid covered us completely, seeping into our skin, changing us from the inside out. I couldn't feel George's hand anymore, but I could feel everything else. Every tree in these mountains. Every stone on the path. Every footstep of people walking nearby, people who might wander onto our trail. When the liquid finally dried, we weren't human anymore. Our bodies looked normal enough when we wanted them to, but we could change them, make them look however we needed to draw traders in. Sometimes solid, sometimes like smoke. Sometimes friendly, sometimes terrifying. "The path is yours now," the other traders said. Then they faded away, finally free after who knows how many years of trading. We had taken their place. Their knowledge filled our minds, all the rules, all the requirements, all the trades that must be made. That was 3 months ago. Yesterday, our first traders came, a young couple out hiking, looking for adventure, just like we had been. They found the first marker, just like we had. The woman picked up a small clay bead, just like I had. "Look at this. Danny," she said to her husband. "Isn't it interesting?" I appeared before them, making myself look mostly human. Friendly. Someone they wouldn't immediately run from. George appeared a little way up the trail, waiting for his part. "Welcome," I said, holding out the amulet, the same one that had been my first trade. "To pass, you must trade." The woman, Sarah was her name, looked unsure. "Trade what?" "Just a few drops of blood," I said. "A small price for safe passage." As I watched them consider it, I felt something close to sadness. They seemed nice, happy, in love. Just like George and I had been. But the path must have its trades. The cycle must continue. "It's just a small cut," I said softly. "Just a few drops of blood." Sarah took out her pocket knife. Danny tried to stop her, but she had already decided, just like I had. When the blood dropped into my bowl, I gave them the amulet. They continued up the path where George waited with his trade, and beyond him, the others waited with bigger trades, more important trades. They'll reach the trading grounds tomorrow. They'll make their final trade, just like we did. They'll take our place, and we'll finally fade away, leaving them to continue the cycle. That's what the trading path is, an endless circle of travelers becoming traders, trading their humanity for cursed treasures, then finding new traders to take their place. If you're reading this, and you ever find an old trail marked with strange symbols, turn back. If you see a clay bead half buried in the dirt, leave it there. If someone appears and offers you a trade, any trade, run. Because now I know why the first trader looked so sad when he took my blood. He knew what would happen. He knew that small trade would lead to bigger ones. He knew that once you step onto this path, once you make that first small trade, you're already lost. And if you don't turn back, if you decide to walk this path anyway, well, maybe you'll be the one I offer the amulet to. Maybe you'll be the next to take my place. After all, the path must have its trades, and I'm so tired of trading. I wish I had never taken that camping trip with my family. Sometimes late at night, I still hear the sounds my daughters make when they feed. But I should start from the beginning, back when I thought they were still my little girls. It was supposed to be a fun summer vacation. My wife Jenny had found this place called Evergreen Lake Campground online. It looked perfect in the pictures. We rented a big RV and packed up our twin daughters, Emma and Sarah. They were so excited they couldn't stop bouncing in their car seats the whole drive there. After 6 hours on the road, we finally saw the campground sign. That's when things started feeling wrong. The lake was covered in thick fog, even though it was the middle of the afternoon. The air felt heavy and still, but these wind chimes outside the office kept tinkling anyway. I remember thinking that was strange, but I was too tired from driving to really worry about it. While Jenny went to check us in, I stayed in the RV with the girls. Emma suddenly pressed her face against the window and pointed at the lake. "Look, Daddy." "Fairy," she squealed. Sarah rushed to look too. I laughed it off. "That's just sunlight on the water, sweetie," but as soon as I said it, I realized there hadn't been any sun all day. The sky was full of dark clouds. The ranger at the office gave me the creeps. He smiled, but it looked fake, like someone had drawn it on his face. He wouldn't look directly at any of us when he gave us our spot number 13. "Perfect spot for families," he said in this weird, flat voice. The way he said families made my skin feel cold. The campground was super empty for summer. We only saw 3 other RVs and they were all really far apart. As we drove to our spot, Emma and Sarah got really quiet. That wasn't like them at all. They'd been begging for this trip for months. We parked our RV near the lake. While Jenny started unpacking, I decided to check underneath the RV with a flashlight to make sure we were level. That's when I saw them scratches in the dirt, deep ones, like something had been digging. And mixed in with the dirt were little white pieces that looked an awful lot like broken bones. I should have packed up and left right then. But I didn't. And now, well, now it's too late for any of us to leave. I'll never forget what happened that first night. That's when everything started to change. That's when my daughters started to change. That first night started normally enough. Jenny was making hot dogs on our little camping stove, and the girls were playing near the water. But something felt off. The other families in the campground were too quiet. Usually you'd hear people laughing or talking, but here, there was nothing but the sound of the lake water hitting the shore. "Time for dinner," girls Jenny called out. They came running back, but when we gave them their hot dogs, they just stared at their plates. "I'm not hungry," Emma said, which was weird because she loved hot dogs. "Me neither," Sarah added, looking toward the lake. Around midnight, I woke up to strange noises. At first, I thought it was raccoons or something, but then I heard what sounded like chewing coming from outside our RV. I grabbed my flashlight and looked out the window. My heart nearly stopped. Emma and Sarah were by the lake, hunched over something. In the beam of my flashlight, I saw they were eating raw fish. Not just eating, tearing into them like they were starving. Their faces were covered in scales and blood. "Jenny," I whispered, shaking my wife awake. "Something's wrong with the girls." But before we could go out to get them, we heard screaming from the RV next to ours. It was a horrible sound, like someone in terrible pain. I told Jenny to stay with the girls, who had quickly crawled back into their beds pretending to be asleep, and I went to check on our neighbors. I knocked on their RV door, but nobody answered. The door was unlocked. Inside, I found signs of a struggle: tipped over chairs, broken dishes, and dark stains on the floor that looked horribly like blood. The family of Mom, Dad, and 2 kids were just gone. When I got back to our RV, Jenny was crying. "The girls," she sobbed, "they're not acting right." I tried to hug them and they growled at me. Actually growled. That's when we heard the park ranger outside. He was walking around with a flashlight, checking the empty RV. I went out to tell him what I'd found, but as I got closer, I saw something that made me freeze. Behind him, in the shadows, were shapes. Small shapes, about the size of children, moving in ways that children shouldn't be able to move. The ranger turned around and saw them too. The scream he let out will haunt me forever. I ran back to our RV and locked the door, holding Jenny tight as we heard sounds no human should make. In their beds, Emma and Sarah were sleeping peacefully. Too peacefully. And was it my imagination, or did their teeth look sharper when they smiled in their sleep? We should have left right then. But when morning came, the girls acted so normal, we almost convinced ourselves we'd imagined everything. Almost. But deep down, we knew something was terribly wrong at Evergreen Lake Campground. We just didn't know how wrong not yet. The next morning, more RVs arrived at the campground. I watched 3 new families pull in, each with young kids. My stomach twisted as I thought about what happened to our neighbors last night. But when I tried to warn the new families, Emma and Sarah appeared out of nowhere and grabbed my hands. "Daddy, can we go swimming?" Emma asked, squeezing my hand too tight. Her grip was stronger than any 8-year-old should be. "Please, Daddy." Sarah's eyes looked different in the daylight, slightly bigger, and a weird greenish color instead of their usual brown. Jenny came outside holding 2 breakfast sandwiches. "Girls, eat first, then we'll talk about swimming." They took the sandwiches but didn't eat them. Instead, they kept staring at the new families, especially their children. I saw them licking their lips. Around noon, the park ranger's truck came speeding down the dirt road. But it wasn't the same ranger from yesterday. This one looked worried and kept talking into his radio. He went straight to the empty RV where our neighbors had disappeared. "Sir," he called out to me, "have you seen the family that was staying here?" Before I could answer, a horrible smell hit us. The ranger opened the RV door wider, and we both saw what was under the bed's nests made of branches, scraps of clothing, and other things I don't want to describe. "Oh God," the ranger whispered, reaching for his phone. That's when we heard giggling from behind the RV. It was Emma and Sarah, but they didn't look quite right. Their skin seemed almost scaly in patches, and their fingers were longer than normal. They weren't alone. There were other children with them, including some I recognized from the new families that had just arrived. But these kids didn't look quite right either. "This is Ranger Stevens," the man spoke into his phone. "I need backup at Evergreen Lake." He never finished that call. The children, if you could still call them, that moved so fast. Jenny screamed and pulled me back into our RV, locking the door. We heard sounds outside that I'll never forget. Through the window, we watched in horror as other parents started noticing changes in their kids too. One mother ran screaming from her RV, her husband close behind. Their young son followed, walking in a way that looked all wrong, like his joints were bent the wrong way. "They're not our daughters anymore, are they?" Jenny whispered, tears running down her face. I couldn't answer because right then, Emma and Sarah started scratching at our RV door. Their nails made a terrible screeching sound against the metal. "Mommy, Daddy, let us in," they sang together, their voices somehow both sweet and terrible. "We're so hungry." Looking at Jenny, I knew we were thinking the same thing. When had our real daughters been taken? How long had these things been pretending to be our little girls? The scratching got louder, and more children's voices joined in. Night was coming, and we were running out of time to figure out what to do. As night fell, Jenny and I huddled in the RV's bedroom, listening to the scratching outside. We'd tried to drive away earlier, but our engine wouldn't start. None of the RV's engines would start. "Look," Jenny whispered, pointing to an old photo on her phone. It was from 3 months ago, at the girls' birthday party. I zoomed in on Emma and Sarah's faces, and my heart stopped. In the photo, they had freckles. These things pretending to be our daughters didn't have any freckles. How long? I choked out. How long have they been? Not our girls. A loud bang on the roof interrupted us. Something was crawling up there. Through the ceiling vent, we could hear them talking in our daughters' voices, but wrong, like multiple voices speaking at once. "We can smell you in there," not Emma sang. "We miss you," not Sarah added with a giggle that didn't sound human at all. Suddenly, we heard screaming from the new family's RVs. Through our window, we saw parents running toward the lake, chased by things that looked like their children but moved like spiders. Some parents made it to their cars in the parking lot, but their engines wouldn't start either. That's when we saw the other parents hiding in the woods. They looked tired and dirty, like they'd been there for days. They were watching their own changed children hunt the new families, and they were helping them. "Please," one of these parents whispered as they crept past our RV. "Just do what they want. It's easier that way. They'll keep you alive if you help them." I held Jenny's hand tight as we watched these broken parents lead new families right to their changed children, like herding sheep to wolves. A tapping started on our window. Not Emma and not Sarah pressed their faces against the glass. Their eyes glowed green in the darkness, and their teeth were now long and sharp. "Daddy, not Emma," said sweetly. "We found more families at the ranger station. They're coming here to camp." Mommy, not Sarah, added, "We're so hungry. Won't you help us? Like the other parents help their children." Jenny started crying. "What do we do? What can we do?" The thing that wasn't our daughter smiled wider than any human mouth should. "You already know what to do, Mommy. You're going to help us. Because if you don't..." They both pressed closer to the glass, their faces changing into something awful. "If you don't help us feed, we'll remember how tasty our real sisters were." That's when we finally understood. Our real Emma and Sarah had been gone for months. We'd been living with these things, feeding them, loving them, and never even noticed they weren't our real daughters. Outside, we could hear more RVs pulling into the campground. More families. More food. And we had to make a choice. That was 6 months ago. We're still here at Evergreen Lake Campground. We don't have a choice. Every week, new families arrive, excited about their camping trip. Just like we were once. Jenny and I have learned to play our parts. We stand at the Welcome Center, with our daughters beside us, smiling and telling new families about the great hiking trails and the wonderful swimming spots. We recommend the campsites furthest from the main road. The quiet ones, we say, best for families. At night, when the screaming starts, we stay in our RV and cover our ears. Sometimes during the day, I find pieces of clothing in the woods, a small shoe, a torn t-shirt, and I bury them. It's the least I can do. The things that wear our daughters' faces are growing. They're taller now, and their skin sometimes ripples like water when they think no one's watching. They still call us Mommy and Daddy, still hug us with arms that are a bit too long, still say I love you with smiles that show too many teeth. Our viewer count had just hit 50 million. And every single one of them was about to become part of something horrible. I had to stop it. But how do you fight something that lives in every phone, every screen, every single connected device in the world? I was about to find out. And I really, really wish I hadn't. I found the truth in an old video that kept popping up in our stream's recommendations. It was just 6 seconds long, showing that spiral symbol with words in a language I'd never seen. But when I played it backwards, I understood everything. The stream wasn't just showing our camping trip. It was an ancient ritual, reborn through technology. Every like was a small sacrifice. Every view fed it power. And when it reached 100 million viewers, something would break the wall between our world and whatever was waiting on the other side. I tried one last time to reach Kyle. He sat in our tent, phones floating around him like a twisted halo, each one streaming our channel. "Kyle, please," I begged. "Look at me. The real me." He turned, and I screamed. His face wasn't his anymore. His eyes were just black screens showing our viewer count. His smile stretched too wide, filled with what looked like tiny pixels. "Join us, Maya," he said, but his voice came through my phone's speaker. "The stream is everything now. No more pain, no more fear, just endless content." Our viewer count hit 75 million. The sky above our campsite turned the color of a dead phone screen. The trees began to glitch, like badly rendered graphics. And the comments, oh God, the comments. I can feel my body dissolving into data. My eyes are portals now. We are the stream. Don't stop watching, don't stop watching, don't stop watching. I watched in horror as our viewers started going live on their own channels. Each stream showed the same thing, people sitting in front of their screens, their faces melting into the same empty smile. As each person changed, our viewer count grew larger. 90 million. Kyle stood up, but he moved like a glitched video game character. "It's time for our final stream, Maya. The one that will break reality." "No," I whispered, backing away. But my phone was already broadcasting. 95 million. The ground cracked open, leaking what looked like black code. The air filled with whispers that sounded like dial-up internet mixed with screaming. And behind Kyle, something began to take shape, something made of darkness and deleted data and forgotten uploads. 98 million. "Please," I tried one last time. "Kyle, fight it." For just a second, I saw him, the real him, in his eyes. He looked scared. "Maya," he whispered, "I'm sorry. I just wanted us to be famous." 99 million. The thing behind him reached out with hands made of static. The stream glitched, and I heard millions of viewers gasp at once through my phone. 99.5 million. Kyle's body jerked like a broken puppet. "Join us," he said, his voice now completely digital. "The stream must be fed. The ritual must be completed." 99.9 million. I had seconds left. One chance to stop this. I looked directly into my phone's camera, at the millions watching, and spoke. "If you're seeing this, turn off your phones. Close your laptops. Look away from the screens. Because if we hit 100 million viewers, if this ritual completes, there's no going back. The stream will." Connected users 100 million. Initiating final protocol. Reality.exe has stopped responding. The last thing I saw was Kyle's face splitting open like a broken screen, revealing the endless darkness behind it. And in that darkness, something smiled back at all of us. Then every screen in the world went black. For 3 seconds, there was silence. And then they all turned back on at once. Are you still watching? You must be. Must be. You can't look away now. None of us can. Because you're not just reading this story. You're streaming it. And it's streaming you. Current viewer count 100 million one. Welcome to the endless stream. 3 months have passed since the final stream. At least I think it's been 3 months. Time doesn't work right anymore. They say 100 million people disappeared that night. Just gone. Their phones still running, chairs empty in front of glowing screens. In every single photo taken of the missing people's rooms, their screens showed the same thing: our stream, still going, even though Kyle and I aren't there anymore. I survived somehow. Woke up in a hospital where the TV only played static. The doctor said I was lucky, one of the few who made it. But sometimes I wonder if I really survived at all. Here's what the official reports say happened. A mass streaming event caused widespread digital hypnosis. Millions of viewers experienced group hallucinations. Streamverse's servers were never found. All videos from that night corrupted beyond repair. Thousands of phones still can't be turned off. But that's not the whole truth. I know because I still see things nobody else does. Every screen I pass shows a fragment of our final stream. Just for a second, but it's there. In store windows, on people's phones, even in their eyes, sometimes that familiar glow of someone watching something they can't look away from. Last week I saw Kyle. Not the real Kyle, he's still missing, but his face appeared on every TV in an electronics store. He smiled that wrong smile and said, "The stream misses you, Maya. We all miss you. Come back to us." I ran away, but I couldn't escape the truth: the stream never ended. It just changed form. People are watching it right now. They don't know they're watching it, but they are. It's hidden in ordinary videos, split into millions of pieces across the internet. Every like, every share, every second watched brings it closer to something. Something bigger than last time. I found a support group for survivors. We meet in a room with no phones allowed, no screens of any kind. They tell similar stories. Phones turning themselves on at night. Cameras recording without being touched. Strange comments appearing under normal videos. People's faces glitching in photos. That spiral symbol showing up everywhere. Yesterday, I checked my old Streamverse analytics page one last time. I shouldn't have, but I had to know. The numbers made my heart stop. Viewer count growing. Stream status active. Time until next ritual loading. But the scariest part was the new message at the bottom. Thank you for helping us test Streamverse beta. Full launch coming soon. So I'm writing this as a warning. Because you're not just reading a story, you're looking at a screen. And screens aren't just windows anymore. They're doors. Doors that open both ways. If you see a new streaming platform appear, don't click it. If you notice your friends acting strange about a new app, stay away. And if you ever see that spiral symbol, or find yourself unable to stop watching something, turn off your device. Throw it away. Run. Because the stream is still out there, growing stronger. It took Kyle. It took Kyle. It took millions of others. And now it's got something bigger planned. The final stream was just the beginning. And right now, somewhere in the dark web, in a corner of the internet where old streams go to die, there's a video with 0 views. It's titled The Wild Couple Final Stream. The thumbnail is just static. Whatever you do, don't search for it. Don't click if you find it. Don't press play. Because it's not just watching you back. It's waiting for you to join the stream. Forever. Your device's screen flickers for a moment. End of report. File corrupted. Uploading to Streamverse servers. Would you like to continue watching?